Commissioner Valdric Flimpnozzle had exactly three things in common with the black hole. He sucked the joy out of everything around him. He was incredibly dense, and nobody really understood how he'd gotten where he was. On this particular Tuesday morning, while sipping his regulation temperature beverage from his regulation-sized mug at his regulation height desk, Flimpnozzle was about to make the single worst decision in the recorded history of galactic bureaucracy. And that's saying something, considering the Galactic Safety Commission had once approved a children's toy that turned out to be a miniature neutron star. "Gentle beings," Flimpnozzle announced to his assembled staff of equally bewildered middle managers, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone reading a tax manual. "Today we make history." His assistant, a nervous creature called Quilbert Wobblethwaite, whose species had evolved anxiety as their primary survival trait, nearly dropped his stack of safety violation reports. "Sir, are we finally approving the request to remove the caution, gravity and effect signs from every planet?" "Bigger!" Flimpnozzle slammed his regulation-sized fist on his regulation desk, causing his coffee mug to perform a small but perfectly choreographed dance of physics. "We're creating the Class 15 Death World certification test." The silence that followed was so complete that somewhere in the Andromeda galaxy, a philosopher paused mid-thought to wonder why the universe had suddenly become more peaceful. Wobblethwaite's left eye began twitching, which in his species was equivalent to a full-blown panic attack. "Sir, with all due respect, the highest classification we've ever tested is Class 8, and that resulted in the great screaming incident of Sector 12. "Precisely!" Flimpnozzle beamed with the sort of pride usually reserved for parents whose children had just discovered fire. "Nobody expects us to go bigger. Think of the paperwork, the forms, the interdepartmental memos." What Flimpnozzle failed to mention, mostly because he'd failed to read the actual documentation, was that the Class 15 Death World they'd selected for testing was Proxima Nightmaros, a planet so thoroughly committed to killing everything that landed on it that it had actually developed a sense of professional pride about the matter. Proxima Nightmaros didn't just have acid rain. It had acid rain that fell upward on Tuesdays, sideways on weekends, and occasionally took the form of tiny, screaming droplets that spelled out insulting messages in 17 different languages. The gravity didn't just fluctuate. It had mood swings that would make a teenage poet jealous. The local flora hadn't evolved to be carnivorous. They'd evolved to be carnivorous with opinions about their food choices. "But sir," Wobblethwaite squeaked, his voice reaching frequencies that made nearby communication equipment spontaneously file noise complaints. "What if someone actually tries to take the test?" Flimpnozzle laughed, a sound like a garbage disposal trying to digest a symphony orchestra. "My dear Wobblethwaite, that's the beauty of it. Nobody will ever be stupid enough to attempt a Class 15 certification. We'll get all the bureaucratic glory of creating an impossible standard without any of the messy business of actual testing." He gestured grandly at the holographic display showing Proxima Nightmaros in all its terrifying glory. The planet was currently experiencing what the meteorological department euphemistically called a light shower of liquid malevolence, while its 3 moons competed in what appeared to be an orbital demolition derby. "We'll publish the requirements," Flimpnozzle continued, warming to his theme like a politician approaching an election year. "Hold a few press conferences, maybe commission a study group or 12, and then sit back and collect the Administrative Achievement Awards. Genius!" Wobblethwaite made a small noise that sounded like a deflating balloon trying to apologize for existing. "And if someone actually shows up wanting to take the test, then we'll politely explain that it's a theoretical exercise in bureaucratic excellence and offer them a nice cup of tea instead," Flimpnozzle replied, already mentally composing his acceptance speech for the Golden Clipboard Award. What neither of them knew, as they sat in their temperature-controlled office surrounded by filing cabinets that contained enough safety regulations to crush a small moon, was that at that very moment, approximately 17 parsecs away, Captain Mackenzie, Tank Rubberboot, was reading their newly published Class 15 Death World certification requirements with the sort of gleeful interest that most species reserved for discovering edible food. "Brilliant!" Tank shouted to her crew, causing 3 different early warning systems to activate across 2 star systems. "Look at this beauty. Acid rain, gravity fluctuations, carnivorous plants with attitude problems, atmospheric composition that changes hourly, and weather patterns designed by what appears to be a committee of angry gods. Who's in?" The enthusiastic response from her crew was so loud that it briefly interrupted subspace communications across the entire sector, causing approximately 47 alien species to simultaneously wonder if they'd left their universe's stove on. Back on the Galactic Safety Commission headquarters, Flimpnozzle was just putting the finishing touches on his presentation when his communication device made the sort of cheerful chiming sound that usually preceded really bad news. "Commissioner Flimpnozzle," came a voice so aggressively cheerful that it made children's birthday parties sound like funeral dirges. "This is Captain Tank Rubberboot of the Terran Exploration Corps. We'd like to schedule our Class 15 Death World certification test for next Tuesday. Also, do you happen to have anything more challenging available? This one looks like it might be too easy." Flimpnozzle stared at his communication device as if it had just insulted his mother, declared war on his homeworld, and eaten his lunch, all simultaneously. Wobblethwaite fainted. For exactly 14 seconds, the only sound in Commissioner Flimpnozzle's office was the gentle humming of the air recycling system and the distant sound of Wobblethwaite's consciousness departing for what it probably hoped would be a better dimension. Then reality crashed back like a freight train carrying a cargo of unwelcome news. "Did she just say it looked too easy?" Flimpnozzle whispered to his unconscious assistant, who remained diplomatically silent on the matter. The communication device, apparently deciding that the conversation wasn't quite surreal enough yet, chimed again. "Oh, and Commissioner, we've got a small request. Could you possibly add a few more moons to the orbital pattern? Our navigator, Brick Hammerstein, says the current 3-moon demolition derby looks a bit too predictable. Maybe throw in some temporal anomalies while you're at it. We'd hate for this to be boring." Flimpnozzle's left eyelid began twitching in a rhythm that coincidentally matched the distress signal frequency used by 17 different spacefaring civilizations. He stared at the holographic display of Proxima Nightmaros, where a particularly enthusiastic acid storm was currently etching what appeared to be rude gestures into the mountain ranges. "This can't be happening," he muttered, reaching for his emergency stress relief manual titled "So You've Accidentally Doomed Civilization, a Bureaucrat's Guide to Plausible Deniability." But it was happening. At that very moment, across the galaxy, word was spreading through the human colonies faster than gossip at a family reunion. The Terran News Network had picked up the story, and their headline read, "Humans find ultimate death planet. Complain it's not deadly enough. Drell." On the mining station, orbital platform Smashy McStabface, Chief Engineer Rubble Crunchbeard was already packing his toolkit. "Class 15 Death World, eh? Sounds like my kind of Tuesday. Wonder if they need someone to fix their weather control systems. I bet I could make that acid rain really interesting." Meanwhile, on the agricultural planet New Mudville, Farmer Gertie Boomcrack was harvesting her prize-winning explosive turnips when she heard the news. "Carnivorous plants with opinions," she cackled, her laugh causing a nearby flock of domesticated pterodactyls to spontaneously reorganize their flight formation. "Amateur hour. Wait until they see what my vegetables can do when they're properly motivated." Back on the commission headquarters, Flimpnozzle was frantically flipping through regulation handbooks, looking for some obscure bureaucratic clause that would let him cancel what was rapidly becoming the worst idea since someone decided to give artificial intelligence access to social media. "Wobblethwaite," he shouted, at his still unconscious assistant. "Wake up! I need you to find the emergency cancellation protocol." Wobblethwaite's species had evolved the ability to remain unconscious during stressful situations as a survival mechanism. Unfortunately for Flimpnozzle, this was exactly the sort of situation that qualified. The communication device chimed a third time, and Flimpnozzle approached it with the same enthusiasm most people reserved for approaching unexploded ordnance. "Commissioner, Tank Rubber Boot again. Quick question, do you happen to have any Class 16 planets available? We just reviewed the specs for Nightmaros, and honestly, it sounds like a nice vacation spot compared to my cousin Thunderbolt's backyard barbecue last summer. You should have seen what happened when she tried to grill those mutant space lobsters." Flimpnozzle made a sound like a deflating accordion being attacked by a swarm of tone-deaf bees. He looked at his career achievement awards, his perfectly organized filing system, his regulation height desk with its regulation-sized coffee mug, and realized that all of it was about to become as relevant as a chocolate teapot in a supernova. The worst part wasn't that humans wanted to take his impossible test. The worst part wasn't even that they thought it looked easy. The worst part was that somewhere, in the deepest, most terrified corner of his bureaucratic soul, Flimpnozzle was starting to suspect that they might actually be right. 3 days later, Captain Tank Rubberboot stood on the observation deck of her ship, the Probably Fine, watching Proxima Nightmaros rotate slowly below them like a cosmic mood ring having an existential crisis. The planet's surface was currently a delightful shade of "oh dear God, why?" with occasional flashes of "that can't be natural." "Beautiful morning for certain death, isn't it?" she remarked cheerfully to her assembled crew, a collection of humans who had somehow managed to make suicidally optimistic into a career path. Her first officer, Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein, was a man built like a brick shithouse and about twice as intelligent as the average brick. He was currently studying the planetary scan results with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a crossword puzzle written in hieroglyphics. "Captain, according to these readings, the planet's trying to kill us in at least 47 different ways, and that's just what we can detect from orbit." "Only 47? Tank grinned, her smile bright enough to power a small space station. "Back home, my grandmother's garden was more dangerous than that. Remember the incident with the roses?" The crew collectively shuddered. They'd all heard about Grandma Rubberboot's roses. The galactic insurance companies had classified them as a Category 9 natural disaster. Dr. Wilhelmina Crankshaft, the ship's chief medical officer and part-time philosopher, was examining the atmospheric readings with professional interest. The air composition changes every 6 minutes. Currently, it's 60% nitrogen, 30% oxygen, 9% pure malevolence, and 1% what the sensors are diplomatically calling unidentified screaming particles. "Screaming particles?" asked Ensign Bulldozer McWrenchface, the ship's youngest crew member and proud holder of 3 separate PhDs in applied mayhem. "The particles aren't actually screaming," Dr. Crankshaft explained patiently. "They just make everything else scream when they come into contact with organic matter. It's a subtle but important distinction. Meanwhile, down on the planet's surface, Proxima Nightmaros was having what could generously be called a bad day. The planet had been looking forward to its first proper test subjects in over a century. It had spent months preparing special atmospheric cocktails, training its carnivorous plants in advanced intimidation techniques, and even choreographing a particularly impressive gravity fluctuation routine. But now, as it observed the human ship through its network of crystalline sensing organs embedded in the mountain ranges, Proxima Nightmaros was experiencing something it had never felt before: performance anxiety. These weren't like the other species that had attempted the lower-class certifications. Those beings had approached with appropriate terror, made satisfying screaming noises, and died in predictably dramatic ways. These humans were discussing the planetary death traps like they were reviewing a restaurant menu. The planet's mood ring surface shifted from "oh dear God, why" to confused beige as it tried to process this unprecedented situation. Back on the Probably Fine, Tank was addressing her crew with the sort of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing surprise vacations. "Right then, people. Who wants to hear the mission briefing? Is it going to be as cheerfully terrifying as usual?" asked Chief Engineer Griselda Boltcutter, a woman who had once fixed a warp core with nothing but determination and a really big hammer. "More so," Tank announced, pulling up a holographic display that showed Proxima Nightmaros in all its malevolent glory. "Our objective is simple. Survive 72 hours on the surface, establish a base camp, catalogue the local wildlife, and submit a comprehensive survival report to the Galactic Safety Commission." The crew nodded enthusiastically. This sounded perfectly reasonable to them, which was probably the first sign that they weren't entirely sane. "Now," Tank continued, "according to the Commission's documentation, previous attempts at Class 8 certifications resulted in what they call immediate and spectacular organic dissolution. The Class 15 requirements specifically mention that survival beyond 6 hours is considered theoretically impossible under any known laws of physics." Theoretically impossible. Brick scratched his head with the sort of puzzled expression that usually preceded either brilliant insights or massive explosions. "But we're not theoretical. We're right here." "Exactly," Tank beamed. "Which means either the laws of physics are wrong or the Commission doesn't know what they're talking about. Either way, it should be fascinating to find out." Dr. Crankshaft raised her hand. "Captain, I feel obligated to point out that the medical bay is currently stocked with 17 different antidotes to 17 different types of acid, 43 varieties of antivenom, and the experimental device called a universal OE fixer that I'm not entirely sure how to operate." "Perfect!" Tank clapped her hands together, causing several nearby instruments to recalibrate themselves out of sheer nervous energy. "That should cover at least 3% of what this planet can throw at us." Ensign McWrenchface raised his hand tentatively. "Captain, what about the other 97%? Tank's grin widened to the point where it was probably visible from space. "That's where the fun begins." Down on Proxima Nightmaros, the planet registered this conversation through its atmospheric sensors and experienced what could only be described as the geological equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Its carefully planned death scenarios suddenly seemed inadequate. These humans weren't just unafraid of dying, they seemed to be looking forward to it as a recreational activity. The planet's surface shifted to panic purple as it desperately began recalibrating its murder systems. Maybe if it made the acid rain more acidic, or taught the carnivorous plants some new vocabulary, surely there had to be something that would make these creatures behave like normal, sensible beings who understood that death was supposed to be unpleasant. But as the human ship began its descent toward the surface, Proxima Nightmaros realized with growing horror that it might have finally met something more stubborn than itself: human optimism in the face of certain doom. The landing was what Captain Tank Rubberboot would later describe in her official report as refreshingly violent. The Probably Fine touched down during what Proxima Nightmaros had intended to be a welcoming committee of atmospheric lightning, gravitational anomalies, and a particularly aggressive acid storm that spelled out death threats in 12 different languages. Instead of screaming and dying as expected, Tank poked her head out of the airlock and shouted, "Wow, what a light show! Brick, are you getting this on camera? The folks back home are going to be so jealous." Proxima Nightmaros paused mid-lightning bolt, experiencing what could only be described as the planetary equivalent of a confused stutter. In over 3 billion years of existence, nothing had ever responded to its murder weather with enthusiasm. "All right, everyone," Tank announced, stepping onto the planet's surface with the casual confidence of someone walking into their own living room. Remember the safety protocols. If you start dissolving, let someone know. If the gravity goes sideways, grab onto something heavy. And if anyone finds plants that want to have a philosophical discussion about the nature of existence before eating you, that's perfectly normal for a Tuesday. The crew filed out of the ship, each member carrying equipment that looked suspiciously like camping gear rather than survival equipment. Dr. Crankshaft had brought what appeared to be a portable tea kettle. Chief Engineer Boltcutter was carrying a toolbox and humming what sounded like a construction worker's anthem. Ensign McWrenchface had somehow managed to pack an inflatable hot tub. "Sir," Brick called out, consulting his scanner with the focused attention of someone reading a restaurant menu. "I'm detecting approximately 14 different types of toxic atmosphere. Gravity that's currently doing the cha-cha, and what the computer is classifying as aggressively carnivorous landscape features." Carnivorous landscape? Tank perked up with interest. "You mean the ground wants to eat us? That's brilliant. I've never been personally threatened by geography before." At that exact moment, the ground beneath her feet opened up to reveal what was unmistakably a mouthful of crystalline teeth, each one gleaming with the sort of malevolent hunger that usually required several years of acting school to achieve properly. Tank looked down at the geological mouth, which was making threatening growling noises that registered on the Richter scale. "Well, hello there. Aren't you a pretty little death trap? Yes, you are. Yes, you are." The carnivorous ground made a sound like a confused landslide. This wasn't how this was supposed to work. Test subjects were meant to run screaming, not offer baby talk to the murder terrain. "Captain," Dr. Crankshaft called out, her voice carrying the sort of professional calm that medical officers used when discussing particularly interesting diseases. "The atmospheric analyzers are showing some unusual readings. The air isn't just toxic, it's creatively toxic. The molecules are apparently arranging themselves into patterns that spell out insults about our ancestry in languages that haven't been invented yet." "Fascinating!" Tank pulled out a notebook and began scribbling observations. "Brick, make a note to ask the linguistics department about that when we get back. Meanwhile, has anyone seen any of these carnivorous plants with opinions that the briefing mentioned?" As if summoned by her question, a massive vine emerged from what had previously appeared to be solid rock. The vine was covered in thorns that gleamed with an oily substance that probably wasn't organic moisturizer, and it swayed back and forth while making sounds that were unmistakably meant to be threatening. "Greetings, doomed mortals," the plant announced in a voice like grinding stone mixed with really bad Shakespeare. "I am Stabicus, the terrible, destroyer of hopes and dreams. Prepare to face your inevitable doom at the hands of my toxic embrace." Tank blinked. "Oh, you can talk, that's wonderful. I'm Captain Tank Rubberboot, and this is my crew. We're here for the Class 15 Death World certification. Would you mind if we asked you a few questions for our report?" Stabicus the Terrible paused mid-menacing wave. "Questions? What? Nobody has ever asked me questions before. They usually just scream and run around making delightfully panicked noises." "Well, we're researchers," Tank explained cheerfully. "So, Stabicus, how long have you been in the professional intimidation business? Did you always want to be a carnivorous plant, or did you consider other career options?" The plant's thorns began to droop slightly. "Well, I started out in landscaping, but the job market was terrible, and the union benefits for murderous flora are surprisingly good. I've been thinking about going back to school for my degree in applied botany, but the commute is murder. Literally." "That's wonderful." Tank scribbled more notes. "Following your dreams is so important. Dr. Crankshaft, could you take some samples of Stabicus's toxin? I bet the medical journals would love to publish a paper on sentient plant biochemistry." "I'd be happy to." Dr. Crankshaft approached with her sample kit, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was walking toward a plant that had just introduced itself as a destroyer of hopes and dreams. Stabicus watched her approach with growing confusion. Wait, you want samples of my deadly toxin, but it's supposed to dissolve your internal organs while causing excruciating pain. Oh, that sounds medically fascinating, Dr. Crankshaft said, pulling out a small vial. Could you tell me about the molecular structure? I'm particularly interested in the pain-inducing compounds. Are they neurologically targeted, or do they work through inflammatory responses? Well, Stabacus's voice had taken on the uncertain tone of someone whose entire worldview was being gently but thoroughly demolished. Nobody's ever asked me about the science before. They usually just die screaming. It's very lonely, actually. Tank looked around at her crew, who were setting up equipment with the casual efficiency of people who had clearly done this sort of thing before. You know what, Stabacus? Would you like to help us with our research? We could really use a local guide, and you obviously know the area better than anyone. Proxima Nightmaros registered this conversation through its network of sensing crystals and experienced what could only be described as a planetary-scale headache. In less than 30 minutes, these humans had somehow turned its most fearsome carnivorous plant into an enthusiastic research assistant. This was not how Death Worlds were supposed to work. By hour 6 of what should have been a swift and decisive massacre, Proxima Nightmaros was experiencing its first full-scale existential crisis. The humans had not only survived the impossible conditions, they had somehow convinced half the planet's murder ecosystem to join their research project. Stabacus the Terrible was now wearing what appeared to be a tiny name tag that read, "Hello, my name is Stabacus, Research Assistant," and was enthusiastically explaining the finer points of atmospheric toxin distribution to Dr. Crankshaft. The carnivorous ground had given up trying to eat people and was instead helping Chief Engineer Boltcutter level the foundation for what she cheerfully called Base Camp Certain Doom. "You see," Stabacus was saying, gesturing with a thorn-covered vine toward a particularly ominous cloud formation, "the screaming acid particles are actually quite sophisticated. They're programmed to target specific emotional triggers: fear, despair, the crushing realization that you've made poor life choices. Standard Death World psychology, really. Fascinating." Dr. Crankshaft made more notes. "Have you considered publishing? The Journal of Applied Xenobiology would be very interested in this research." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein had discovered something that was causing Proxima Nightmaros considerably more concern than the failure of its primary murder systems. Brick was staring at his environmental scanner with the sort of concentrated attention usually reserved for people trying to remember if they'd left the stove on before departing for a 3-week vacation. "Captain," he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant someone had discovered something either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous, "I think we might have a problem." Tank looked up from where she was helping Ensign McWrenchface inflate the hot tub, because apparently surviving on a Class 15 Death World wasn't complete without recreational bathing facilities. "What kind of problem, Brick? The fun kind or the paperwork kind? The kind where the planet's environmental control systems are having what I can only describe as a nervous breakdown," Brick replied, tapping his scanner with the sort of gentle concern usually reserved for sick pets. "The atmospheric processors are running at 200% capacity, trying to maintain lethal conditions, but they keep getting confused because we're not dying according to schedule." Tank paused in her hot tub assembly duties. "Confused how?" "Well," Brick scratched his head, "the system keeps detecting that we're still alive and assumes it must not be working hard enough, so it increases the toxicity levels. But then it detects that we're not just alive, but actually having a good time, which causes it to recalibrate again. It's been doing this for 6 hours straight." Dr. Crankshaft looked up from her conversation with Stabacus. "Are you saying the planet is accidentally poisoning itself trying to kill us?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Brick confirmed. "The feedback loop is causing system-wide malfunctions. The gravity generators are stuttering. The weather control grid is overheating, And according to these readings, the planet's core temperature has increased by 15 degrees in the last hour. Proxima Nightmaros, listening to this conversation through its crystal sensor network, experienced what could only be described as the geological equivalent of a panic attack. The humans were absolutely right. In its desperate attempts to create increasingly lethal conditions, it was slowly cooking itself from the inside out. "That's terrible," Tank exclaimed, and for the first time since landing, she actually looked concerned. "We can't let the planet hurt itself just because we're too stubborn to die properly. Stabicus, is there some sort of manual override for the environmental systems?" Stabicus's thorns perked up with enthusiasm. "Oh, absolutely. The control center is located in the northern crater of Infinite Despair. Although I should mention that it's traditionally guarded by the Apex Predator Council, a collection of the planet's most dangerous creatures specifically bred to prevent tampering with the murder systems." Apex Predator Council? Ensign McWrenchface's eyes lit up with the sort of dangerous enthusiasm that made risk assessment professionals wake up in cold sweats. "Do they take appointments, or is it more of a walk-in situation?" Chief Engineer Boltcutter looked up from where she was somehow teaching the carnivorous ground to help with construction work. "How dangerous are we talking here? Like mildly irritated bear dangerous, or accounting department during budget season dangerous?" "Well," Stabicus considered this carefully, "the council consists of Grinthak the Bone Crusher, a creature with 17 different types of venom and a personality disorder. There's Vextria the Soul Render, who can kill you with interpretive dance. And finally, there's Kevin." The humans paused. "Kevin?" Tank asked. "Kevin is the scariest," Stabicus said solemnly. "Kevin used to work in customer service." Dr. Crankshaft shuddered. "Customer service? Good Lord, what kind of customer service?" "Intergalactic insurance claims," Stabicus whispered. The entire human crew went silent for a moment, processing this information with the appropriate level of horror. "Right then," Tank said finally, her voice carrying the sort of determined cheerfulness that usually preceded either great victories or spectacularly creative disasters. "We'd better get moving. Can't have the planet giving itself a fever on our account. Stabicus, would you mind showing us the way to this northern crater of Infinite Despair? It sounds delightfully ominous." As the humans began packing their equipment with the casual efficiency of people preparing for a particularly challenging picnic, Proxima Nightmaros made a discovery that shook it to its molten core. Somewhere in the process of watching these impossible creatures turn its murder world into their personal research facility, the planet had developed something it had never experienced before: concern for their welfare. The realization hit with the force of a tectonic shift. It didn't want these strange, cheerful beings to get hurt trying to fix its environmental systems. It didn't want them to face the Apex Predator Council, especially not Kevin. For the first time in its 3-billion-year existence, Proxima Nightmaros was worried about someone other than itself. This was either character development or a complete system malfunction, possibly both. As the humans set off toward the northern crater of Infinite Despair, chatting excitedly about the prospect of meeting creatures specifically designed to kill them, Proxima Nightmaros found itself doing something it had never done before, hoping that everything would turn out all right. The planet's surface shifted from panic purple to what could only be described as nervous but optimistic teal, a color that had never appeared in its emotional spectrum before and probably shouldn't have been geologically possible. Deep in its molten heart, Proxima Nightmaros was beginning to suspect that these humans weren't just surviving its death world conditions, they were changing the very nature of what it meant to be a death world at all. The journey to the northern crater of Infinite Despair took them through what Stabicus cheerfully called the Valley of Certain Death and Moderate Inconvenience. The landscape was a masterpiece of hostile design, crystalline spires that hummed with lethal energy, pools of acid that bubbled with malicious intent, and gravity wells that switched directions every few meters just to spite anyone trying to walk through them. The humans treated it like a nature hike. "Oh, look at those lovely crystal formations," Tank exclaimed, pointing at a cluster of minerals that were actively trying to emit death rays. "Brick, are you getting geological samples? The University Geology Department is going to flip when they see these." Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein was indeed collecting samples, despite the fact that the crystals kept attempting to disintegrate his sample containers. "The mineral composition is fascinating, Captain. These crystals appear to be powered by pure concentrated malevolence. I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Crankshaft had stopped beside one of the acid pools and was taking atmospheric readings with professional enthusiasm. "The chemical composition of this acid is remarkable. It's not just corrosive, it's actually personally offended by organic matter. The molecules seem to have developed individual grudges." Chief Engineer Boltcutter was examining the gravity wells with the sort of technical interest usually reserved for particularly challenging mechanical problems. "You know, with a few modifications, these gravity fluctuations could power a really efficient transportation system. Stabacus, do you think the planet would be interested in a public transit proposal?" Stabacus, who was beginning to understand that humans approached literally everything as either a research opportunity or a home improvement project, had stopped trying to be threatening and was now focusing on being a helpful tour guide. "Well, I suppose the planet has never considered constructive applications for its murder physics. You'd have to ask the Apex Predator Council, though. They make all the major policy decisions." Ensign McWrenchface, who had been unusually quiet for the past hour, suddenly spoke up from where he was examining what appeared to be a flower made of crystallized screaming. "Captain, I think I've figured out what's really going on here." Tank looked up from where she was having an animated discussion with a boulder that was apparently sentient and deeply depressed about its job as a crushing hazard. "What's that, McWrenchface?" "This planet isn't really trying to kill us," he said, his voice carrying the sort of certainty that usually preceded either brilliant discoveries or massive explosions. "It's trying to communicate with us. All these death traps, the environmental hazards, the carnivorous landscape features, they're not murder systems. They're the planet's way of trying to interact with visitors." The entire group stopped walking. Even the actively homicidal landscape seemed to pause in its attempts to be lethal. "Think about it," McWrenchface continued, warming to his theme. "Proxima Nightmaros has been alone for billions of years. No visitors, no conversation, no social interaction whatsoever. Then species start showing up for these certification tests, and what happens? They run away screaming or die immediately. The planet never gets a chance to actually talk to anyone." Tank stared at him. "You're saying the planet has been accidentally killing everyone because it's lonely?" "Exactly," McWrenchface grinned. "It's like a cosmic-scale case of social anxiety. The planet gets so excited about having visitors that it accidentally overwhelms them with enthusiasm. The death traps aren't meant to be fatal, they're meant to be impressive." Stabacus's thorns were practically vibrating with excitement. That actually makes perfect sense. I always wondered why the murder systems seemed so over the top. I mean, 17 different types of acid rain. That's not efficient killing, that's showing off. Deep beneath their feet, Proxima Nightmaros was experiencing something that could only be described as the geological equivalent of someone finally understanding a joke they'd been trying to tell for 3 billion years. The humans were right. It hadn't been trying to murder visitors, it had been trying to impress them. The problem was that most species interpreted impressive display of planetary power as immediate mortal danger. But humans apparently interpreted it as interesting research opportunity and new friends to make. Dr. Crankshaft looked around at the spectacular death landscape with new understanding. So all of this, The carnivorous plants, the gravity anomalies, the acid storms. It's the planetary equivalent of someone showing off their hobby collection. And we're the first visitors who've ever stuck around long enough to appreciate the craftsmanship, Tank added, her grin widening to dangerous proportions. The planet's surface began shifting through a rapid spectrum of colors, settling on what could only be described as delighted golden yellow. For the first time in its existence, Proxima Nightmaros felt truly understood. This emotional breakthrough was interrupted by a sound like a landslide having an argument with a symphony orchestra. The ground ahead of them split open to reveal what was unmistakably an entrance to something large, complex, and probably very important. "Well," Stabicus said, his voice carrying a note of nervous excitement, "that would be the entrance to the Apex Predator Council chambers. They must have been monitoring our conversation." Tank rubbed her hands together with anticipation. "Excellent. Time to meet the management. I wonder if they're as lonely as the rest of the planet." As they approached the massive entrance, carved into the living rock and decorated with what appeared to be motivational posters featuring images of various creative ways to die, Ensign McWrenchface made another observation. "Captain, if I'm right about the communication theory, then the Apex Predator Council isn't really a group of monsters designed to kill intruders. They're probably the planet's attempt at creating the ultimate welcoming committee." "A welcoming committee?" Brick asked, studying his scanner readings. "But Stabicus said they include creatures with 17 types of venom and someone who can kill with interpretive dance." "Well," Tank said thoughtfully, "have you ever seen interpretive dance? If it's done really well, it can be quite overwhelming. Maybe that's the point." Stabicus was looking increasingly excited about this new perspective on his world. "You know, Grinthak the Bone Crusher has always been very proud of his venom collection. He's constantly trying to show it off to visitors, but they usually die before he can explain the subtle differences between his recreational toxins and his formal occasion poisons." "And Kevin?" Dr. Crankshaft asked. "Kevin genuinely loves helping people solve their problems," Stabicus admitted. "It's just that his customer service experience has given him a very thorough approach to gathering information. He asks a lot of questions." As they stepped through the entrance into the council chambers, Tank turned to her crew with the sort of expression that usually preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or international incidents. "Right then, everyone. Remember, we're not here to fight the ultimate apex predators. We're here to meet the planet's social committee and help them learn more effective communication techniques." Behind them, the entrance sealed shut with a sound like destiny clearing its throat. Ahead of them, in the depths of the northern crater of infinite despair, something very large was approaching with what sounded suspiciously like enthusiastic footsteps. The council chamber was a magnificent display of architectural intimidation that had clearly been designed by someone with a PhD in applied terror and a minor in interior decorating. The walls were carved from living obsidian that pulsed with ominous light. The ceiling was supported by pillars that appeared to be made of crystallized nightmares, and the floor was inlaid with what looked like a mosaic depicting the galaxy's most creative methods of experiencing existential dread. It was, Tank had to admit, quite impressive. "Wow!" she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the chamber with inappropriate cheerfulness. "This is absolutely gorgeous. The attention to detail is incredible. Stabicus, who designed this place." Stabicus's thorns perked up with pride. "Oh, that was Grinthak. He has a degree in intimidating architecture from the University of Cosmic Horror. He spent 3 centuries on this project. Nobody's ever complimented it before. Usually they're too busy screaming." At that moment, the source of the enthusiastic footsteps revealed itself. Grinthak the Bone Crusher emerged from the shadows, and he was indeed an impressive sight, standing roughly 12 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted between colors that had no names in any known language, and sporting 17 different venom glands that glowed with bioluminescent pride. Grinthak was clearly a masterpiece of evolutionary intimidation. He was also carrying what appeared to be a tea service. "Greetings, tiny mortals!" Grinthak boomed in a voice like a friendly earthquake. "Welcome to the northern crater of infinite despair. I am Grinthak the Bone Crusher. Would you care for some refreshments?" The humans stared. This was not quite what they had expected from a creature whose professional title suggested a career in skeletal destruction. "That's very kind of you," Tank replied, apparently unfazed by being addressed by a 12-foot-tall apex predator offering beverages. "We'd love some tea. I'm Captain Tank Rubberboot, and this is my crew. We're here about the environmental control systems that are giving the planet a fever." Grinthak's eyes lit up with what could only be described as delighted surprise. "Oh, wonderful. Nobody's ever accepted my hospitality before. I've been practicing my hosting skills for centuries, but previous visitors always seemed to expire before we could get to the refreshment portion of the encounter." He began setting out delicate china cups with claws that could have carved through starship hulls. "I do hope you'll try my special blend. It's a combination of 17 different types of poison, but I've diluted them to levels that should only cause mild hallucinations and a pleasant tingling sensation." Dr. Crankshaft's medical training kicked in. "How mild are we talking here, and what sort of hallucinations?" "Oh, mostly just seeing colors that don't exist, and occasionally hearing the voices of ancient cosmic entities discussing their favorite recipes," Grinthak replied cheerfully. "Very mild. Last time I tested it, the hallucinations only lasted 6 months. Chief Engineer Boltcutter accepted a cup with the casual confidence of someone who had once accidentally drunk hydraulic fluid and found it refreshing. 6 months? That's nothing. I once had a bout of food poisoning that lasted 8 months after eating at that cantina on Zeta Reticuli Prime." Grinthak's massive frame practically vibrated with excitement. "Really? Oh, you simply must tell me about that. I'm always looking for new inspiration for my toxin blends." While this delightful conversation about comparative poisoning was taking place, the chamber filled with the sound of interpretive dance. Vextria, the soul render, appeared in a swirl of movement that was indeed overwhelming, but more in the way of performance art than mortal terror. She was a creature of impossible grace, flowing between forms that suggested both deadly predator and avant-garde artist. Her interpretive dance appeared to be conveying the theme, "Welcome, small but interesting visitors. Please enjoy your stay, and don't mind the existential dread." "That's beautiful," Ensign McWrenchface applauded enthusiastically. "The way you captured the essence of cosmic uncertainty while maintaining thematic coherence was absolutely brilliant." Vextria paused mid-interpretive soul rendering, her multiple eyes widening with surprise. In 3,000 years of perfecting her deadly art form, nobody had ever offered constructive criticism that wasn't in the form of dying screams. You understood the thematic structure?" she asked, her voice like music played on instruments made of crystallized starlight. "Of course." McWrenchface pulled out his notebook. "I did my thesis on xenocultural performance art. Would you mind if I asked about your creative process? The transition from the looming threat movement to the inevitable doom sequence was particularly sophisticated." Vextria's dance shifted to what was unmistakably the interpretive dance equivalent of blushing. "Well, nobody's ever analyzed my work before. I've been working on a new piece called The Eternal Screaming of the Void, but in a nice way. Would you like to see it?" This artistic discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Kevin, and Kevin was exactly what the humans had expected based on Stabicus's description. He was a perfectly ordinary-looking being, perhaps slightly shorter than average, wearing what appeared to be a customer service uniform that had seen better millennia. His most notable feature was his smile, which carried the sort of professional warmth that could survive any amount of bureaucratic horror. "Hello there," Kevin said, his voice carrying the cheerful efficiency of someone who had spent eons helping people navigate insurance claims. I'm Kevin. I understand you're here about some environmental control issues. I'll just need to gather some information to help resolve your concerns. First, could I get your full names, species classification, home planet registration numbers, next of kin contact information, preferred method of death notification, and a brief description of your last will and testament? Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein, who had dealt with military bureaucracy his entire career, recognized a kindred spirit. Actually, Kevin, we're more concerned about the planet's environmental systems overheating. The feedback loops are causing dangerous core temperature fluctuations. Kevin's smile brightened to the point where it was probably visible from orbit. Oh, a technical issue. I love technical issues. Let me just get the proper forms. Now, have you tried turning the planet off and on again? What about checking if all the murder systems are properly calibrated? Have you submitted a formal complaint through the proper channels? Do you have your death certificates pre-filled for efficiency? Tank watched this exchange with growing understanding. Kevin, how long have you been trying to help people solve their problems? Oh, about 4,000 years, Kevin replied happily. I originally worked for Galactic Insurance Solutions before taking this position. I specialized in claims that involved what we technically called acts of cosmic horror beyond mortal comprehension. Very satisfying work, lots of paperwork. Dr. Crankshaft had a sudden realization. Kevin, when visitors come here, do you try to help them solve their problems by asking them questions? Of course, that's proper customer service protocol. Although I notice that most visitors tend to have some sort of psychological breakdown after the first few hundred questions. I always assumed it was stress-related. Grinthak nodded enthusiastically, nearly spilling his tea service. Yes, and I always tried to show them my venom collection to help them relax, but they seemed to find it distressing for some reason. Vextria performed a brief interpretive dance that conveyed the concept of well-intentioned social interaction gone horribly wrong. Tank looked around at the three beings who had been described as the most terrifying creatures on a Class 15 death world and realized what had actually happened. You're not apex predators at all, are you? You're the planet's hospitality committee. The three creatures exchanged glances that somehow managed to be both cosmic and sheepish. Well, Grinthak admitted, we did try to be properly terrifying, but it never seemed to work out quite right. Visitors would arrive. We'd attempt to provide a suitable apex predator experience, and somehow they'd always end up having psychological breakdowns before we could properly welcome them. It's been quite frustrating, Vextria added, her dance now expressing centuries of misunderstood social intentions. Kevin nodded sympathetically. I've filed approximately 47,000 incident reports about the communication failures, but the feedback forms always came back marked recipient deceased before I could implement proper customer service improvements. Ndrugum, Tank set down her cup of mildly hallucinogenic tea, which was actually quite pleasant once you got used to the fact that it made your teeth glow purple, and addressed the assembled hospitality committee with the sort of diplomatic warmth that had once prevented 3 separate interstellar wars. Well, I think we've identified the core problem here, she announced. You've all been trying so hard to provide the ultimate death world experience that you've been accidentally overwhelming your guests before they could appreciate your efforts. Grinthak's 17 venom glands pulsed with what appeared to be embarrassment. We just wanted to make a good impression. The Galactic Safety Commission's requirements specifically called for unsurvivable conditions and apex predators of unimaginable terror. We've been doing our best to meet professional standards, but that's exactly the issue, Dr. Crankshaft interjected, pulling out her medical scanner and waving it in the general direction of the environmental control systems. The planet's been trying so hard to be deadly that it's been overloading its own infrastructure. Look at these readings. Core temperature up 15 degrees and climbing, atmospheric processes running at dangerous levels, and the gravity generators are developing stress fractures. Kevin immediately perked up with professional interest. Oh, infrastructure maintenance issues. I have the proper forms for that. Let me see. Yes, here we go. Environmental System Breakdown Protocol, subsection 47, paragraph 12. Have we tried percussive maintenance? What about submitting a warranty claim? Is the planet's insurance up to date? Chief Engineer Boltcutter studied Kevin's forms with the sort of technical appreciation usually reserved for particularly elegant engineering solutions. You know, Kevin, these are actually quite comprehensive. But I think the real solution is simpler than all this paperwork. Proxima Nightmaros, can you hear us? The chamber rumbled in response, and the crystallized nightmare pillars began to glow with what could only be described as attentive interest. Right then, Boltcutter continued, addressing the planet directly. You don't need to be a Class 15 death world. You've been killing yourself trying to meet standards that were never meant for someone with your enthusiasm for hospitality. The rumbling intensified, and the obsidian walls began displaying what appeared to be confused geometric patterns. Ensign McWrenchface stepped forward, his notebook still in hand. What Chief Boltcutter is trying to say is that you've been misunderstanding the assignment. The Galactic Safety Commission created an impossible test because they thought nobody would be crazy enough to try it. But you've been taking it seriously and literally killing yourself to provide the experience. Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein consulted his scanner again. The good news is that we can fix the environmental systems. The bad news is that it requires shutting down the murder protocols entirely and recalibrating everything for what we might call aggressively friendly instead of inevitably fatal. Vextria performed an interpretive dance that conveyed the concept of cautious hope mixed with cosmic uncertainty about career changes. But what will I do if I'm not a death world? The planet managed to communicate through a series of seismic vibrations that Kevin immediately began translating into the proper forms. I've been a death world for my entire existence. It's the only identity I've ever known. Tank grinned with the sort of dangerous enthusiasm that usually preceded either brilliant solutions or spectacular disasters. That's the beautiful part. You don't have to stop being impressive, you just need to be impressive in a different way. Instead of being the galaxy's most dangerous planet, you could be the galaxy's most interesting planet. Grinthak's massive head tilted in confusion. Interesting how? Think about it. Tank gestured expansively, nearly knocking over Kevin's carefully organized paperwork. You have carnivorous plants with graduate degrees in philosophy, gravity wells that could power transportation systems, atmospheric chemistry that's so advanced it can insult people in languages that haven't been invented yet, and the most knowledgeable hospitality committee in 3 sectors of space. Dr. Crankshaft caught on immediately. You could be a research station. Scientists from across the galaxy would come here to study your unique ecosystem. Anthropologists would want to interview your flora. Engineers would beg to examine your gravity manipulation technology. And, Ensign McWrenchface added excitedly, artists would come here specifically to study Vextria's interpretive dance techniques. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who can convey the existential nature of cosmic horror through movement? Vextria's dance shifted to what was unmistakably the interpretive equivalent of excited squealing. Kevin looked up from his forms with growing excitement. And think of all the customer service opportunities. Instead of death certificates, I could be processing research permits, visitor accommodations, equipment rental agreements. The paperwork possibilities are endless. Stabicus, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. You know, I've always wanted to teach. Do you think there might be opportunities for carnivorous plant education programs? Absolutely, Tank exclaimed. Stabicus, you could establish the galaxy's first university program in applied botanical intimidation. Students would come from everywhere to learn from you. The chamber began to vibrate with what sounded suspiciously like planetary laughter. The walls shifted through a rapid spectrum of colors, finally settling on optimistic rose gold with undertones of excited possibility. "No, but what about the Galactic Safety Commission?" Grinthak asked, his venom glands now pulsing with what appeared to be hopeful anxiety. "Won't they be upset that we've failed to provide a proper Class 15 Death World experience?" Tank pulled out a communication device with the sort of gleeful anticipation usually reserved for people about to deliver really excellent pranks. "Oh, I think Commissioner Flimpnozzle is going to be very interested in our findings. Brick, start recording. I think it's time for our preliminary report." Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein activated the recording equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had filed many reports that nobody was going to believe anyway. "Galactic Safety Commission Control. This is Captain Tank Rubberboot reporting on the Class 15 Death World certification test," Tank began, her voice carrying the sort of professional authority that made bureaucrats sit up and pay attention. "I'm pleased to report that Proxima Nightmaros has exceeded all expectations." Kevin immediately began taking notes because proper documentation was essential to any good customer service experience. "The planet's environmental systems are not only functional, they represent the most advanced hospitality infrastructure we've ever encountered. The local ecosystem has demonstrated unprecedented cooperation with testing personnel, and the Apex Predator Council has provided exemplary customer service throughout our stay." There was a long pause from the other end of the communication link, followed by the sound of someone choking on what was probably regulation temperature coffee. "Did you say, oh, customer service?" came Commissioner Flimpnozzle's voice, sounding like a man whose entire world-view was being gently but thoroughly demolished. "Outstanding customer service," Tank confirmed cheerfully. "In fact, we'd like to recommend Proxima Nightmaros for immediate reclassification as a Class 1 hospitality world with specialized research facilities. The planet has expressed interest in hosting scientific conferences and educational programs." The sound that came through the communication device could only be described as the bureaucratic equivalent of a complete system crash. "Furthermore," Tank continued, clearly enjoying herself, "we'd like to request permission to extend our stay indefinitely. The research opportunities here are unprecedented, and frankly, this is the most comfortable field assignment any of us have ever experienced." "Comfortable?" Flimpnozzle's voice cracked like a whip made of pure disbelief. "You're on a Class 15 Death World." "Well," Tank replied, glancing around at Grinthak's tea service, Vextria's ongoing interpretive dance performance, and Kevin's enthusiastic paperwork organization, "that's really more of a philosophical question at this point." 6 months later, the planet formerly known as Proxima Nightmaros had undergone what could only be described as the most successful career change in galactic history. The newly christened Proxima Hospitalis had become the most sought-after research destination in 3 sectors, with waiting lists longer than most species' evolutionary timelines. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been acid storms designed to dissolve hope itself, there were now atmospheric chemistry laboratories where the planet's advanced molecular engineering was being studied by xenochemists from across the galaxy. The gravity wells that had once threatened to crush unwary visitors were now powering the most efficient transportation system anyone had ever seen, with commuter shuttles that could navigate 3-dimensional traffic patterns that made even experienced pilots weep with admiration. Commissioner Valdric Flimpnozzle stood in what had once been the northern crater of infinite despair, which was now officially designated as the Proxima Hospitalis Conference Center and Philosophical Discussion Venue. He was holding a cup of Grinthak's latest tea blend, something called mildly existential morning boost with hints of cosmic uncertainty, and trying to process how his career in bureaucratic excellence had somehow resulted in the galaxy's most successful hospitality revolution. "I still don't understand how this happened," he muttered to his assistant, Quilbert Wobblethwaite, who had developed a nervous tic that caused him to spontaneously file imaginary paperwork whenever he was confused. "Well, sir," Wobblethwaite replied, shuffling through a stack of visitor satisfaction surveys that showed ratings so high they were probably violating several laws of statistics. Apparently, when humans encounter impossible situations, they don't have the courtesy to die. Instead, they make friends with the situation and convince it to pursue a more fulfilling career path. Nearby, Dr. Wilhelmina Crankshaft was leading a tour group of medical researchers through Stabacus's newly established Center for Advanced Botanical Psychology and Aggressive Horticulture. Stabacus had traded his intimidating thorns for a professorial demeanor and was currently explaining the philosophical implications of carnivorous plant consciousness to a group of xenobiologists who were frantically taking notes. "You see," Stabacus was saying, gesturing with a vine that now wore small spectacles for purely aesthetic reasons, "the relationship between predator and prey is really more of a cosmic dialogue about the nature of existence. When I threaten to dissolve someone's molecular structure, I'm not actually expressing murderous intent. I'm asking them to consider their place in the universal cycle of matter and energy." One of the researchers raised her hand. "Professor Stabacus, could you elaborate on the emotional spectrum of aggressive flora? Your paper on Feelings and Photosynthesis, a Carnivorous Perspective, revolutionized our understanding of plant psychology." Flimpnozzle watched this exchange with the sort of bewildered fascination usually reserved for observing impossible mathematical proofs. "Wobblethwaite, am I hallucinating, or did that plant just get tenure?" "I believe Professor Stabacus received his permanent appointment last month, sir," Wobblethwaite confirmed, along with a research grant from the Galactic Institute of Advanced Studies. His interdisciplinary work in botanical philosophy has attracted students from over 200 worlds. Mune, in the main amphitheater, Vextria the Soul Render was performing her latest masterpiece, the joyful cosmic dance of successful bureaucratic reform, to an audience of art critics and philosophers who were experiencing what could only be described as therapeutic existential crises. Her interpretive dance had evolved from being accidentally fatal to being intentionally transformative, and tickets to her performances were now more valuable than most planetary currencies. The dance conveyed the story of how a simple misunderstanding about professional expectations had led to the greatest hospitality revolution in galactic history, complete with movements representing bureaucratic confusion, human stubbornness, and the triumphant discovery of mutual understanding. "My God," whispered one critic, tears streaming down his face, "she's managed to choreograph the entire concept of career satisfaction. I can feel my job dissatisfaction being resolved through interpretive movement." Chief Engineer Griselda Boltcutter had established what she cheerfully called the Boltcutter Institute for Applied Impossible Engineering, where she taught other engineers how to convince hostile environments to become friendly through a combination of technical expertise and aggressive optimism. Her first course, How to Fix Things That Are Trying to Kill You, a Practical Approach, had a waiting list that stretched into the next millennium. "The secret," she was explaining to a group of wide-eyed engineering students, "is to remember that most murder systems are just regular systems having a bad day. You approach them with respect, offer them some better career options, and 9 times out of 10, they'll choose customer service over attempted homicide." Kevin had undergone perhaps the most dramatic career transformation of all. No longer confined to processing death certificates and insurance claims, he had become the galaxy's premier specialist in extreme customer service and interdimensional hospitality management. His customer service seminars were so effective that several war-torn systems had hired him to mediate peace negotiations. "The key to successful customer service," Kevin was explaining to a conference room full of diplomatic corps trainees, "is to remember that every complaint is really just a request for help, and every request for help is an opportunity to make someone's day better. Even if they're complaining about your planet trying to dissolve their molecular structure, they're really just asking for a more pleasant visitor experience. Lieutenant Brick Hammerstein had discovered his true calling as the director of the Proxima Hospitalis Institute for Impossible Geological Studies, where he spent his days cataloguing the planet's remarkable ability to modify its own physics in real time. His latest paper, Gravity as a Social Construct, How Planetary Emotions Affect Local Spacetime, had caused 3 different physics departments to have philosophical breakdowns. Ensign Bulldozer McWrenchface had established himself as the galaxy's leading expert in xenocultural communication through shared recreational activities, and his hot tub diplomacy programs had prevented more interstellar conflicts than most peace treaties. Captain Tank Rubberboot stood on the observation deck of what was now called the Probably Fine Research Vessel and Mobile Customer Service Platform, watching the latest group of visitors arrive. These were delegates from the Galactic Council of Impossible Situations, who had come to study what was being called the Proxima Hospitalis Miracle for potential application to other cosmic-scale problems. Tank grinned as she watched the delegates being greeted by Grinthak's latest apprentices, a group of former murder crystals who had retrained as professional welcomers and tour guides. The transformation from Deadly Death World to premier research and hospitality destination had taken exactly 6 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. "Captain," Brick called out from his monitoring station, "we're receiving communication requests from 17 different worlds, asking if we can help them resolve their own impossible situations. Apparently word has gotten out about our methods." "Excellent," Tank replied, pulling up the star charts with the sort of enthusiasm that had once made risk assessment professionals weep openly. "Wobblethwaite, make a note in the official record. Humans have now successfully solved the galaxy's most impossible death world by the simple expedient of treating it like a customer service issue." Wobblethwaite, who had long since given up trying to understand human logic, dutifully filed this information under impossibilities that humans have made possible through aggressive friendliness. Down on the planet's surface, Proxima Hospitalis experienced something it had never felt before: complete and total satisfaction with its place in the universe. It was no longer the galaxy's most dangerous death world, but it had become something infinitely better. The galaxy's most beloved impossible place, where the laws of physics bent themselves into pretzels just to make visitors feel welcome. The planet's surface had settled into a permanent state of contented coral pink with overtones of cosmic fulfillment, a color that several art movements had already adopted as their official aesthetic. As Tank prepared to depart for their next impossible assignment, she paused to look back at the world that had tried so hard to kill them and had instead become their greatest success story. In the distance, she could see Kevin organizing a group of visiting bureaucrats, Grinthak teaching a masterclass in advanced hospitality architecture, Vextria performing for an audience of enraptured philosophers, and Stabicus leading a graduate seminar on the ethics of carnivorous consciousness. "You know what the funny thing is?" Tank said to her crew as they prepared for departure. "The Galactic Safety Commission was absolutely right. Proxima Nightmaros really was impossible to survive unchanged." Tank's grin widened as she watched a group of former murder hornets buzzing contentedly around a welcome sign that read, "Proxima Hospitalis, where every visit is an adventure in applied friendship." It's just that nobody bothered to ask whether the planet wanted to be changed too.
The thing about being the newest species admitted to the Galactic Council is that everyone treats you like the intern who accidentally got hired as CEO. Sure, humans had mastered faster-than-light travel, developed revolutionary quantum computing, and figured out how to make dairy-free ice cream that actually tastes good. But according to the Council, we still couldn't be trusted to do anything more complex than organize the office party. That's where I come in. My name is Jack Porter, and I'm what the Council politely calls Earth's cultural integration specialist. In reality, I'm the guy they send in when they need a human who can smile and nod while being talked down to by beings who think they invented electricity just because their species naturally evolved to shoot lightning from their appendages. The council chamber lived up to its name, a massive spherical room with floating platforms arranged in concentric circles, each holding representatives from different spacefaring civilizations. The whole setup screamed we're more advanced than you in the most passive-aggressive way possible. My platform, naturally, was stationed at the very bottom, right next to the maintenance hatch. Ambassador Crix, a tall crystalline being who looked like what would happen if a chandelier mated with a praying mantis, peered down at me from 3 levels up. Their faceted heads sparkled with what I'd learned to recognize as barely contained condescension. "Cultural integration specialist Porter," they chimed, their voice creating literal harmonics in the air. "The Council has decided to grant Earth a unique opportunity to demonstrate its maturity." I maintained my diplomatic smile, the one that said, "I'm totally not imagining you as a disco ball right now." "That's wonderful news, Ambassador. We're always eager to prove ourselves." Cultural Officer Nipa, an enthusiastic blob of purple goo with multiple eye stalks, bubbled excitedly from their containment sphere. "Oh yes, we're giving Earth the honor of hosting this year's intergalactic cultural exchange." Now, in human terms, that's like being asked to host the Olympics, the World Cup, and every major religious holiday simultaneously, while also making sure nobody accidentally starts an interstellar war because they used the wrong fork at dinner. That's unexpected, I managed, while mentally calculating how many antacids I'd need to survive this assignment. "May I ask why Earth was chosen?" Crix's crystalline structure refracted light in what passed for their species equivalent of a smirk. "The Council believes that organizing a simple social gathering will be within humanity's limited capabilities." And the way they said limited capabilities made it sound like they were talking about a particularly dim houseplant. I've met houseplants with more respect for humanity than some council members. "Of course," I replied, channeling my inner kindergarten teacher patience. "We'd be honored to host such a prestigious event. I assume there are guidelines?" Nipa's eye stalks wiggled with excitement. "Oh yes, 17,423 pages of them. I've been studying human culture extensively, and I've already prepared several volumes of additional suggestions specifically tailored to Earth's unique situation." I could feel a headache forming. "Unique situation? Your species' charming tendency toward chaos," Crix explained, their crystal segments clicking in what I'd learned was their version of a condescending chuckle. "For instance, we've noticed that humans have an alarming habit of asking what's the worst that could happen, right before causing major diplomatic incidents." "That only happened twice," I protested. "And the second time doesn't count because technically, according to subsection 7b of the Treaty of Proxima Centauri, teaching the Zygons about practical jokes was a cultural exchange initiative. The Zygon Empress is still demanding reparations for the whoopee cushion incident," Crix reminded me sternly. "In our defense," I said, "nobody told us their species communicates through controlled flatulence." Nipa's containment sphere bobbed enthusiastically. "That's exactly why we've prepared such comprehensive guidelines. For instance, Section 453 covers proper airlock protocol for species that exist in gaseous form, including specific regulations about which way they should spiral when entering a room." I nodded, already knowing I'd need to assemble a team of Earth's finest overthinkers and chaos agents. Not because I wanted to cause trouble, but because sometimes the only way to handle overwhelming bureaucracy is to follow the rules so perfectly that they break themselves. "And when would you like this event to take place?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Oh, the standard planning period for an event of this magnitude is typically 15 solar cycles," Crix said, their crystalline structure gleaming. "However, given Earth's need to prove itself, we've scheduled it for next month." Of course they had, because nothing says we're setting you up to fail, quite like giving someone a deadline that would make a Time Lord sweat. "Next month," I repeated, maintaining my diplomatic smile while mentally composing my resignation letter. "How thoughtful of you to give us so much time to prepare." We thought so, Crix agreed, missing the sarcasm. Remember, prove that humans can follow simple instructions without turning them into an interstellar incident. As I left the chamber that day, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the council had finally outsmarted themselves. After all, they'd just given a human explicit instructions to be as boring and predictable as possible, and if there's one thing humans excel at, it's malicious compliance. The thing about being given an impossible task by aliens is that you need an impossible team to handle it. Fortunately, I knew exactly where to find one. The United Earth Embassy's basement cafeteria wasn't just where dreams went to die. It was where they got jobs as bureaucrats. Among the fluorescent lights and questionably immortal vending machine sandwiches, I found my first recruit, Jenny Chores, Earth's premier logistics expert and the only person I knew who could make a spreadsheet feel threatened. "Let me get this straight," Jenny said, stabbing her synthetic meatloaf with unnecessary vigor. "They want us to organize the biggest diplomatic event in the galaxy, and they want it to be boring." "Not just boring," I corrected, sliding her the datapad containing the council's requirements. "Predictable, safe, about as exciting as watching paint dry in zero gravity." Jenny's eyes lit up the way they always did when someone told her something was impossible. "They do realize they're asking humans to be predictable, right? The species that invented parkour because regular walking was too boring?" "That's what makes it interesting," I grinned. "They're so convinced we're going to mess this up that they've got a secret betting pool going. Ambassador Crix's assistant let it slip during this morning's orientation meeting." "A betting pool?" Jenny's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Against us? The odds are apparently quite good. The Arcturnians are offering 15 to 1 that we accidentally start at least 3 wars before breakfast." Before Jenny could respond, a tray clattered down next to us. "Did someone say impossible odds against humanity?" Marcus Wong, our resident risk assessment officer, dropped into the seat with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who hadn't just volunteered for disaster duty. "Marcus," I nodded, "I was just about to come find you. How do you feel about helping us organize the most boring event in galactic history?" "You mean, how do I feel about using my powers of risk assessment for evil?" He grinned. "I thought you'd never ask. Did you know I once wrote a 300-page report on the potential dangers of serving hot beverages at diplomatic functions?" "That was you?" Jenny's eyes widened. "That report got coffee banned from the Centaurian peace talks." "And prevented 3 assassination attempts," Marcus added proudly. "Turns out a lot of species consider offering hot drinks a death threat. Who knew?" I pulled up the Council's guidelines on my tablet. "Well, you're going to love this. They've given us a list of 17,000 safety regulations to follow. My personal favorite is Regulation 5439. All anti-gravity buffets must account for species-specific gravitational preferences within a margin of error of 0.0001%. "That's actually impossible," Jenny noted, already pulling up calculation models on her own device. "The gravitational preferences would create conflicting fields that could theoretically turn the entire buffet into a black hole. Only if we use standard gravity generators," Marcus mused, that dangerous glint appearing in his eyes. "But if we followed the regulations exactly—" "No black holes," I said quickly, then paused, "unless they're purely decorative and properly contained." The orientation meeting that afternoon was everything I expected and worse. Cultural Officer Nipa had somehow managed to make their containment sphere even more purple with excitement. "We've prepared a detailed presentation on proper event organization." They bubbled, their eye stalks wiggling in what I'd learned was their species' version of jazz hands. "First, we'll cover the 57 approved methods of saying hello." 2 hours later, we'd made it through proper greetings, and were deep into what constituted appropriate small talk for species that experience time non-linearly. "Remember," Nipa enthused, "never ask a chronivore what they had for lunch, as they're simultaneously having every lunch they'll ever eat." Ambassador Crix's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been concern as they watched our team taking detailed notes. You seem unusually interested in the regulations. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter. Oh yes, I nodded earnestly. We want to make absolutely certain we follow every single rule perfectly. After all, what's the worst that could happen? The entire room went silent. 3 species simultaneously made their cultural gestures for warding off bad luck. Someone in the back actually fainted. Perhaps, Crick said slowly, their facets dulling with worry, we should move on to the section about proper emergency evacuation procedures. Excellent idea, I agreed cheerfully. Jenny, make sure you note down every single possible evacuation scenario. We wouldn't want to miss any of the 1,742 of them. Jenny's fingers flew across her tablet, already categorizing them by species, threat level and potential for accidental temporal displacement. Marcus raised his hand. Quick question about Regulation 12,458 regarding the proper placement of safety signs. It says they must be visible from all dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Does that include theoretical dimensions or just the commonly accessed ones? I watched with deep satisfaction as Crick's crystalline structure developed what appeared to be a stress fracture. After the meeting, Jenny cornered me in the hallway. They're setting us up to fail. Obviously, I agreed, but they've made one critical mistake. They gave us written instructions, Marcus chimed in, joining us with his arms full of regulation manuals. Exactly, I grinned. They told us to be boring, predictable, and to follow every rule to the letter, and we're going to do exactly that. Operation Malicious Compliance, Jenny suggested. Operation Malicious Compliance, I confirmed. Let's show them just how terrifyingly competent humans can be when we're told something's impossible. Marcus hugged his manuals closer. I'll start writing risk assessments for the risk assessments, and I'll begin calculating the optimal level of boring, Jenny added. Did you know there's actually a mathematical formula for predicting how long it takes someone to fall asleep during a presentation? As we headed back to our offices, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the council. They thought they were setting us up for failure, but they'd actually given us something far more dangerous than chaos. They'd given us permission to be perfect. 3 days into planning the most boring event in galactic history, our team had commandeered an entire floor of the embassy. The walls were covered in holographic charts, risk matrices, and what looked suspiciously like a conspiracy board connecting various safety regulations with string. Okay, Jenny announced, standing in front of our main planning screen. I've analyzed every cultural exchange event from the past 3 centuries. The average satisfaction rating is 67.3%. Our target is exactly 67.35%. Why that specific number? I asked, already dreading the answer. Because according to Regulation 8,445, any event scoring above 67.4% must be investigated for potential use of illegal entertainment enhancement substances. She grinned. And anything below 67.3% triggers an automatic cultural sensitivity audit? Marcus looked up from his stack of safety manuals, his eyes bloodshot from reading about proper spoon angles for gelatinous species. I've found something interesting about the seating arrangements. More interesting than the requirement for chairs to be simultaneously comfortable for species with and without physical forms, I asked. Much better, he replied. According to Regulation 9223, seating must be arranged to account for all known political, social, and quantum alignments of the attending species, and according to Regulation 9224, no attendee can be seated in a position that could be interpreted as hierarchically superior to another. Jenny's eyes lit up. But that's physically impossible. The dromedarians have to be seated above everyone else or they'll literally die. But the quantum collective exists in a state of perpetual superiority and inferiority. Exactly, Marcus said, looking far too pleased. The only way to satisfy both regulations is to create a seating arrangement that exists in a state of quantum uncertainty until observed. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Are you suggesting we turn the entire venue into a quantum probability field? It's the only way to be completely compliant with the regulations, he said innocently. And I suppose this has nothing to do with your doctoral thesis on quantum furniture dynamics? I'm just following the rules, Marcus replied, failing to hide his smirk. After all, what's the worst that could happen? 3 more delegates fainted in the hallway outside our office. Our planning sessions were regularly interrupted by NEPA, who seemed increasingly unnerved by our enthusiasm for regulatory compliance. Today they found us debating the proper temperature range for the event. The guidelines state that the venue must maintain optimal comfort levels for all attending species. They bubbled nervously, watching Jenny input calculations. Oh, we know, Jenny replied cheerfully. That's why we're designing a system of localized climate bubbles that will follow each delegate around. We're calling it Operation Goldilocks. Everything will be exactly right. But what about species that define comfort through discomfort? NEPA's eye stalks twisted in confusion. Already accounted for, Marcus chimed in. Their bubbles will maintain precisely calculated levels of optimal discomfort. We've cross-referenced all 17,000 comfort-related regulations. Did you know there's a specific subsection about maintaining appropriate levels of existential dread for species that experience anxiety as pleasure? NEPA's purple colouring took on a distinctly worried tinge. The betting pool, meanwhile, had taken on a life of its own. Our sources, the cafeteria staff who moonlighted as information brokers, reported that the odds had shifted dramatically. No one was quite sure what to make of humans actually following the rules. The Arcturnians have changed their bet, Jenny reported during our daily briefing. They're now offering 20-1 that will accidentally create a perfectly stable bureaucracy. That's ridiculous, Marcus scoffed. According to my calculations, if we follow all the regulations exactly, we'll create at least 3 perfectly stable bureaucracies and 1 minor religion dedicated to proper form filling. I was about to respond when Ambassador Crix materialized in our office, their crystalline form vibrating with barely contained concern. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, they chimed, hitting notes that made my teeth itch. The Council is impressed with your team's dedication to regulatory compliance. Just doing our best to follow the rules, I smiled. In fact, we've been studying the regulations so carefully, we found some fascinating interconnections. Did you know that if you follow all the safety protocols simultaneously, you technically create a perpetual motion machine? A small crack appeared in one of Crix's facets. But don't worry, I continued brightly. We've submitted all the proper paperwork for accidentally discovering a new law of physics, in triplicate, with the required quantum uncertainty margins. The Council has concerns, Crix managed, their voice hitting frequencies that made nearby windows resonate. Your approach seems completely within guidelines, Jenny suggested helpfully. Thoroughly risk-assessed, Marcus added. Predictable, I offered innocently. The crack in Crix's facets spread slightly. We've even prepared contingency plans for our contingency plans, I continued. For instance, in the event that our quantum seating arrangement achieves sentience, which, according to Regulation 15,766, has a non-zero probability, we've prepared the necessary forms to recognize it as a sovereign entity and include it in all future cultural exchange events. Crix's crystalline form emitted a high-pitched sound that made several devices in the room spontaneously recalibrate themselves. The event is in 2 weeks, they finally managed. Surely you can't have everything planned already. Oh, but we do, I smiled, pulling up our master schedule. Would you like to see our minute-by-minute breakdown of the entire event? We've accounted for every possible interaction, including 17 different types of awkward silence. Each one has been carefully categorized and risk-assessed for optimal discomfort levels. As Crix fled our office, their crystal structure showing signs of what their species' medical professionals would later term acute regulatory stress disorder, I turned to my team. I think, I said thoughtfully, they're starting to realize their mistake. Which one? Jenny asked. Giving us written instructions or assuming humans can't weaponize boredom? Both, Marcus grinned, adding another red string to our conspiracy board. Definitely both. The morning of the intergalactic cultural exchange dawned bright and exactly 23.7 degrees Celsius, as mandated by Regulation 4892 for optimal sunrise appreciation across species. Our venue, the newly constructed Terran Diplomatic Center, gleamed with the kind of pristine perfection that made seasoned bureaucrats nervous. "Status report," I commanded from our control center, surrounded by enough holographic displays to make a spaceship bridge look understocked. "All quantum seating matrices are maintaining perfect uncertainty," Marcus reported. "Every chair simultaneously exists and doesn't exist until someone tries to sit in it, at which point it becomes exactly the right type of furniture for their species." "Environmental systems?" I asked. Jenny's fingers danced across her control panel. "Individual comfort bubbles are functioning at 99.9999% efficiency. The magmites are properly heated, the cryogenics are adequately chilled, and the gaseous collective is experiencing just the right amount of cosmic existential dread." The first delegates began arriving exactly on schedule. Their expressions, or various species-appropriate equivalents, shifted from diplomatic politeness to increasing confusion, as absolutely nothing went wrong. Ambassador Crix materialized beside me, their crystalline structure vibrating with suspicion. "Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, this is unexpected." "Is something wrong, Ambassador?" I asked innocently. "No," they admitted, sounding deeply troubled by this fact. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is exactly right. It's unsettling." "We're just following the regulations," I smiled. "Oh, look. The quantum buffet is about to resolve itself into the exact configuration each observer expects to see." Across the room, delegates gasped as the buffet simultaneously became 17 different types of food service, each one perfectly aligned with individual cultural expectations. The chronivores were particularly pleased to find that their section existed at all points in time simultaneously. "The quantum uncertainty field is functioning perfectly," Marcus reported proudly. "Every species feels like they're in the most important position in the room, while simultaneously being aware that everyone else feels the same way." Nipa's containment sphere drifted over, their purple coloring shifting through worried shades of mauve. But where's the chaos? The confusion? The accidental diplomatic incidents? "Oh, we have a thoroughly researched list of exactly when and where those are statistically most likely to occur," Jenny assured them, pulling up a chart. "We've proactively prevented each one through careful application of Regulation 7392 through 12,445. "You prevented the accidents?" Nipa's eye stalks drooped. "But the betting pool is experiencing some interesting fluctuations," I noted, glancing at the latest odds being discreetly displayed on my neural link. "Apparently the Arcturnians are now offering 50 to 1 on us, accidentally achieving perfect bureaucratic harmony." The event continued with horrifying smoothness. Delegates found themselves engaging in perfectly acceptable small talk, guided by our subtle atmospheric adjustments and carefully calculated conversation matrices. Every possible faux pas was prevented before it could occur through our predictive algorithm, which Marcus had dubbed the party pooper. "The Zarblaxians just attempted an unauthorized interpretive dance," Jenny reported. "Environmental systems automatically adjusted the local gravity to make the movements appear completely appropriate for formal diplomatic occasions. The quantum collective is expressing distress about feeling too certain about their position in space-time," Marcus added. "Increase the existential uncertainty field by 7%, I ordered. "But make sure it remains within regulatory limits for metaphysical comfort." Ambassador Crix hadn't moved from their spot beside me for 20 minutes, their crystalline structure developing what appeared to be stress patterns. "This isn't natural," they finally said. "Humans don't do perfect. I believe you'll find that according to Regulation 15,987, perfection is defined as the state of being exactly adequate while maintaining appropriate levels of imperfection to ensure comfort for species that experience distress at flawlessness, I quoted, we're simply maintaining optimal levels of controlled imperfection. A small crack appeared in one of Crix's lower facets. Would you like to see our documentation? I offered helpfully. We've prepared reports on our reports, including a fascinating analysis of how the analysis of our analysis creates a recursive loop of perfect bureaucratic efficiency. The crack spread. We've even submitted the proper forms for accidentally discovering that the universe might be powered by paperwork, Marcus added cheerfully. The required impact assessment for that revelation should be processed sometime in the next 5 to 7 eternities. Across the room, a group of delegates had gathered around the quantum buffet, watching in horrified fascination as it maintained perfect compliance with 17,000 contradictory regulations simultaneously. Is the food supposed to exist in a state of quantum satisfaction? One of them asked nervously. According to Regulation 13,556, all refreshments must maintain optimal levels of existence uncertainty to accommodate species with varying definitions of matter, Jenny explained helpfully. Would you like to see our 70-page report on the philosophical implications of quantum appetizers? The delegate fled, joining a growing group of officials huddled in the corner, watching the perfectly orchestrated event with increasing paranoia. They're waiting for something to go wrong, Marcus observed. That's the beauty of it, I smiled. Nothing will go wrong because we've planned for everything to go exactly right, and somehow that's even more terrifying. Little did they know this was just phase 1 of Operation Malicious Compliance. The real fun would begin when they realized that perfect execution of their regulations had some rather interesting side effects. It started with the bureaucratic collective. They were the first to notice that our perfect compliance with regulations had created what they termed a cascade of competence. 3 of their observers had to be escorted out when they began spontaneously generating new forms to document the unprecedented efficiency. Sir, Jenny reported, trying to hide her grin, the collective is requesting copies of our organizational matrices. Apparently they've never seen such perfectly optimized tedium before. Send them the documents, I nodded. All 17,000 versions cross-referenced with quantum uncertainty margins. Marcus looked up from his monitoring station. You realize what this means, right? We've weaponized boredom so effectively that it's becoming exciting. He was right. Across the venue, delegates were becoming increasingly animated about how smoothly everything was running. The betting pool had transformed into a complex mathematical model, trying to predict just how perfect things could get before the universe objected. Ambassador Crix materialized next to our control station again, their crystalline structure now showing multiple stress fractures. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, we need to discuss what's happening. Is something wrong, Ambassador? I asked innocently. All systems are functioning within specified parameters. Would you like to see the reports? We have them in triplicate with additional copies existing in quantum superposition just in case. That's exactly the problem. Crix's voice hit a frequency that made nearby quantum uncertainties temporarily collapse into certainties. You've somehow turned perfect compliance into a form of chaos. Oh, that, I nodded. Yes, we have documentation for that too. According to our analysis, when you follow all regulations simultaneously, you create what we're calling a bureaucratic singularity, a point of such perfect order that it naturally generates its own form of chaos. The Arcturnians are starting a religion, Jenny reported cheerfully. They're calling it the Church of Optimal Organization. Their first holy text is our event planning spreadsheet. The Quantum Collective is requesting asylum, Marcus added. They say we're the first species to truly understand their simultaneous need for structure and uncertainty. Nipa's containment sphere had turned an interesting shade of puce. But this isn't how humans are supposed to behave. You're supposed to be unpredictable. Oh, we are, I assured them. We're being unpredictably predictable. It's a whole new form of chaos. We've already filed the proper paperwork to have it classified as a novel form of entropy. The chaos cascade was spreading. The chronivores, impressed by our temporal management protocols, were offering to share their secrets of time manipulation, but only if we agreed to help them optimize their scheduling system. The Hive Mind Collective had splintered into 17 perfectly organized subcommittees, each dedicated to studying a different aspect of our organizational methodology. "Sir," Jenny interrupted, her voice urgent, "the bureaucratic collective, they're trying to adopt our systems, all of them, simultaneously." On the main screen, we watched as the notoriously rigid species attempted to implement human-style perfect compliance. The result was something like watching an origami master have an existential crisis. "Should we stop them?" Marcus asked, already calculating the risks. "According to Regulation 14,776, I quoted, all cultural exchange participants must be allowed to freely adopt beneficial organizational methodologies, provided proper forms are filed in advance." "But sir," Jenny grinned, "we filed those forms last week. All 17,000 variations of them," Marcus added, "including one that technically won't exist until next Tuesday." Ambassador Cricks's crystal structure was now emanating a high-pitched whine. "You planned this. Somehow you planned even this." "Of course not, Ambassador," I said soothingly. "We simply followed all the regulations perfectly. How could anyone have predicted that combining 17,000 contradictory rules would create a new form of organizational theory that's simultaneously perfect and chaotic?" "The betting pool has collapsed," Jenny reported. "It's achieved quantum uncertainty about whether it exists or not. The Temporal Logistics Department is requesting our help," Marcus added. "Apparently our event planning is so efficient, it's affecting causality." Across the room, a group of delegates had started what appeared to be a spontaneous seminar on the philosophical implications of perfectly organized chaos. 3 species that had been at war for centuries were now united in their attempt to understand how humans had turned bureaucracy into an art form. "We're getting requests," Jenny announced, her screens filling with messages, "from every major civilization. They all want our organizational protocols." "Send them everything," I nodded. "Every form, every protocol, every quantum uncertain procedure. After all, according to Regulation 16,892, we're required to share any breakthrough in administrative methodologies. Even if that breakthrough technically qualifies as a mimetic hazard?" Marcus asked. "Especially then," I grinned. "Make sure to include all the appropriate warning labels, in triplicate." Ambassador Cricks's crystalline structure had developed so many stress patterns, it was starting to refract light in entirely new wavelengths. The Council will need to discuss this." "Of course," I agreed. "We've already prepared the meeting room. The quantum seating arrangement is primed for optimal discussion efficiency, and we've calculated the exact level of existential uncertainty needed for productive debate." As Cricks fled, leaving behind a trail of crystalline dust, I turned to my team. "I think," I said thoughtfully, "they're finally beginning to understand." "Understand what?" Nipa's eye stalks quivered. "That giving humans written instructions and expecting us to fail," I smiled, "is the worst thing that could happen to the instructions." The Galactic Council's emergency session was held 3 days after what was now being called the Incident of Perfect Compliance. The chamber looked different, partly because of the quantum uncertainty fields that had somehow become permanent fixtures, and partly because 3/4 of the council members were still trying to process what had happened. I stood at my platform, which had mysteriously relocated itself to a position that was simultaneously at the bottom and the top of the chamber. Jenny and Marcus flanked me, both trying not to look too pleased with themselves. Ambassador Cricks, their crystalline form now permanently displaying what their medical staff called regulatory stress patterns, addressed the assembly. "We are here to discuss the unexpected outcomes of the recent intergalactic cultural exchange." "Point of order," called out a representative from the bureaucratic collective. now reformed as the optimized collective for maximum efficiency. According to the new protocols we've adopted from the humans, this meeting requires 17 different types of documentation, including 3 that haven't been invented yet. We've already filed those, Jenny announced helpfully, including the ones that don't exist yet. We have receipts in quantum superposition. Cricks's crystal structure emitted a sound like a chandelier having an existential crisis. That is precisely what we need to discuss. Humanity has somehow turned regulatory compliance into a weapon of mass reconstruction. I object to that characterization, I said calmly. We simply followed your instructions perfectly, repeatedly, with backup copies. The Arcturnian Church of Optimal Organization has already gained 6 million converts, Marcus added helpfully. Their holy scripture is our event planning guide. Apparently the quantum seating chart makes an excellent meditation aid. Nipa's containment sphere had graduated to a shade of purple previously unknown to physics. But the forms, the regulations, they weren't supposed to be actually possible to follow. Ah, I smiled. You should have specified that in writing, preferably in triplicate, with appropriate uncertainty margins. The council chamber erupted into what could only be described as organized chaos. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in their bewilderment at how humanity had turned their own bureaucracy against them. "Order!" Cricks chimed desperately. "We must maintain order." According to Regulation 15,999, Jenny quoted, "Order must be maintained in a state of quantum uncertainty to accommodate species that experience time non-linearly. Would you like to see our 70-page analysis of what constitutes order in a multidimensional probability space?" 3 more council members developed stress patterns. "The council," Cricks managed, their voice hitting frequencies that made abstract concepts vibrate, "has come to a decision. Earth is hereby granted full membership status, effective immediately." "We've already accepted," I nodded. "The paperwork was filed last week, and next week, and in several theoretical timelines." Additionally, Cricks continued, their crystal structure creaking ominously, new regulations are being implemented across council space. The phrase, "what's the worst that could happen?" is now classified as a Class 3 mimetic hazard when spoken in the presence of humans. "We've prepared compliance documentation for that as well," Marcus grinned, "including risk assessments for the risk assessments of classifying the phrase as a hazard." The council chamber had begun to develop its own organizational system, inspired by our event's quantum uncertainty principles. Platforms shifted between positions based on the logical weight of arguments, creating what the quantum collective described as a perfect democracy of bureaucratic chaos. "There's just one more thing," I added, pulling up a final set of documents. "We've taken the liberty of optimizing the entire council regulatory system, all 17,000 volumes of it." The horror in the room was palpable. "Don't worry," Jenny assured them. "We've made it much more efficient. Now it's only 16,999 volumes, but they exist in a state of quantum superposition that makes them simultaneously more and less complicated than before. The new system is already being implemented," Marcus announced. "The paperwork for implementing the paperwork has already filed itself, in triplicate, across 7 dimensions." Ambassador Cricks's crystalline form had developed so many stress patterns that they were technically qualifying as a new form of art in 3 different cultures. "And the best part?" I smiled. "It's all exactly according to regulations, every single one of them, simultaneously." The aftermath of our perfect compliance rippled across the galaxy. The bureaucratic collective evolved into a hybrid system of precise chaos, maintaining order through carefully calculated uncertainty. The quantum collective found peace in the paradox of organized unpredictability. Even the chronivores adapted, creating temporal filing systems that existed at all points in time simultaneously. As for humanity, we gained a reputation, not as the chaos bringers they expected, but as something far more terrifying. Bureaucrats who actually read the fine print. These days, whenever someone in council space suggests giving humans written instructions, they're quietly reminded of the incident of perfect compliance. The betting pools have never quite recovered, and there's a standing regulation requiring all human organized events to include at least 3 minor disasters, just to maintain everyone's peace of mind. But perhaps the most lasting effect was the introduction of a new warning label, now required on all regulatory documents across the galaxy. Caution: contents may be weaponized by humans through exact compliance. For your own safety, please maintain appropriate levels of vagueness in all instructions. After all, in a universe of infinite possibilities, the worst thing that could happen isn't chaos. It's humans with a rulebook and something to prove. The most sophisticated warship in the known galaxy currently resembled what humans might call a toddler's tantrum in space, which, coincidentally, wasn't far from what was actually happening inside its command center. The Grand War Chief, whose actual title contained 16 more adjectives and took 3 solar cycles to pronounce properly, stared at the holographic display with all 4 of his eyes twitching in perfect synchronization. His subordinates, wisely maintaining a distance of exactly 2.7 meters, they had calculated the optimal range for avoiding both spittle and sudden demotions, watched as their leader's epidermis shifted through various shades of puce. This, the Grand War Chief declared, jabbing a tentacle at the rotating image of Earth, is impossible. The senior analysis officer, whose name badge was longer than his service record, cleared all 3 of his throats. Sir, we've triple-checked the data. The humans have precisely 0 planetary defense bunkers. Well, unless you count that one structure in Switzerland where they apparently store something called cheese. The room, filled with the most sophisticated military minds in 17 star systems, collectively processed this information with all the grace of a quantum computer trying to divide by 0. But they used to have them. Another strategist chimed in, their vocal sacs inflating with academic enthusiasm. Our historical records show that just a few of their planetary rotations ago, what they called decades, these humans were absolutely obsessed with digging holes and filling them with concrete. They even had something called a Cold War, which, contrary to what you might think, had nothing to do with temperature regulation disputes. The Grand War Chief's epidermis had now reached a shade of purple previously undiscovered by science. "Are you suggesting," he began, each word dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could corrode tritanium, "that an entire species just forgot how to hide underground?" "Well," the senior analysis officer ventured, pulling up another hologram, "they seem to have developed a rather impressive collection of orbital satellites instead, though most of them appear to be dedicated to something called cat videos and streaming services." The war room erupted into a cacophony of theories, each more outlandish than the last. One junior strategist suggested that perhaps humans had evolved beyond the need for physical shelter, ascending to a higher plane of existence. He was promptly assigned to waste management duties for the next solar cycle. As the debate raged on, nobody noticed the small notation in the corner of the holographic display, blinking quietly. "Warning, data set may be incomplete. Human technological capabilities, classification pending. Note, last assessment team never returned." The Grand War Chief finally raised all 6 appendages, silencing the room. "Clearly," he announced with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong, and had the power to demote anyone who suggested otherwise, "these humans have regressed. They've become soft, complacent. Why, they probably spend all their time watching those cat videos instead of maintaining proper defensive protocols." He turned to face his assembled staff, his epidermis now settling into a smugly satisfied mauve. "Prepare the invasion fleet. We'll show them the folly of abandoning proper bunker protocols. It will be the easiest conquest in Imperial history." As the meeting adjourned, the various officers filed out, already drafting their victory speeches and planning which sectors of Earth they'd claim as personal vacation properties. None of them paid attention to the small alert that had just appeared in their data stream. Update. Previous assessment team location confirmed. Status. Apparently enjoying retirement on something called a beach in Fiji. The first phase of what would become known as the Great Misunderstanding was officially underway, and the universe settled in to watch what promised to be either the quickest invasion in galactic history or the most entertaining military blunder since the Proxima Centauri pasta incident of 2157. The Xylaxian Empire's Historical Research Division occupied what could only be described as a library having an existential crisis. Data streams flickered through the air like caffeinated fireflies, while researchers with too many degrees and not enough sleep attempted to make sense of humanity's defensive evolution. The lead historical analyst, sporting impressive eye bags in all 6 eye sockets, manipulated a temporal visualization of Earth's military development. Look at this obsession with underground structures. They were absolutely everywhere during their 20th century. Every minor political disagreement resulted in another concrete hole in the ground. The display showed a cascade of human bunker designs, from crude underground shelters to elaborate governmental complexes buried beneath mountains. The assembled researchers watched in fascination as humans seemingly competed to see who could dig the deepest hole and fill it with the most paranoia. And then, the analyst continued, gesturing dramatically with 3 of their appendages while using the other 4 to juggle multiple data pads, they just stopped. It's as if they collectively woke up one morning and said, "You know what, maybe living underground isn't all it's cracked up to be." A junior researcher raised an appendage. Could it be related to their discovery of streaming entertainment? Our data shows a direct correlation between the decline in bunker construction and the rise of something called binge-watching. That's the obvious conclusion, the lead analyst replied, with the kind of condescension that could only come from someone with multiple PhDs in xenosociology. But look at these energy readings we're getting from their planet. They're quite literally off the charts. We had to invent new charts. The display shifted to show Earth's current defense infrastructure, or rather, the conspicuous lack thereof. Where once stood missile silos and underground command centers, now there were shopping malls, parking lots, and an alarming number of coffee shops. Their military spending didn't decrease, another researcher noted, squinting at the data with all their eyes. It just went somewhere else. Though according to official records, most of it apparently goes to something called research and development, and coffee. An absolutely staggering amount goes to coffee. The lead analyst pulled up another hologram, this one showing a comparative analysis of Earth's technological progression. See this spike here? It happened right around the time they started dismantling their bunker networks. Their energy consumption patterns changed completely, but we can't figure out where all that power is going. Maybe they're just really inefficient, suggested an optimistic junior researcher, who was immediately pelted with styluses from multiple directions. An entire species doesn't just forget centuries of paranoia-driven construction practices overnight, the lead analyst mused, their epidermis taking on the distinctive shade of deep thought. They're hiding something, something big, something that made all those bunkers obsolete. A nervous silence fell over the research center as this implication sank in. It was broken only by the soft ping of another data point appearing on their screens. Interesting correlation. Earth's coffee consumption increased by 3,000% during the same period their bunker construction ceased. Note, possible causation. The lead analyst stared at the new data, then at their own stimulant beverage, imported at great expense from Earth, then back at the data. Send everything to the War Council, they finally declared. But add a note of caution. Any species that can replace underground fortifications with caffeinated beverages and still maintain superpower status is not to be underestimated. As the researchers compiled their findings, none of them noticed that their own facility's coffee machine had begun brewing on its own, producing the perfect cup of Earth-style espresso. The machine, recently imported from Earth, hummed contentedly to itself, its operating system quietly updating through a network that technically shouldn't have existed. The Xylaxian invasion planning room resembled what might happen if a military academy had a love child with an energy drink factory. Holographic displays flickered with enough intensity to trigger seizures in 17 different species, while strategic officers buzzed around on what was definitely not their first cup of stolen Earth coffee. The Grand War Chief presided over the chaos from his elevated platform, which had been specifically designed to maximize dramatic effect during speeches. "Our invasion strategy must be flawless," he declared to his assembled staff, "though given the humans' apparent regression to pre-bunker civilization, we could probably succeed by throwing rocks at them." The chief strategic officer, riding the wave of their 7th coffee substitute, projected a 3-dimensional map of Earth's major population centers. "Based on our extensive analysis of human entertainment broadcasts, their primary defensive strategy appears to be hoping that a small group of statistically improbable heroes will save them at the last minute." "That can't possibly be accurate," the Grand War Chief scoffed, his epidermis rippling with skepticism. "Sir, they made over 40 documentaries about this phenomenon. They call them superhero movies." The room erupted into what could generously be called strategic discussion, though it more closely resembled a caffeine-powered debate club having an existential crisis. "Their orbital defense network appears to be primarily focused on broadcasting these entertainment signals," noted the technology assessment officer, who had spent the last 3 cycles binge-watching human television and was now speaking in peculiar Earth idioms. "Though I must say, their reality shows are fascinating examples of psychological warfare." The Grand War Chief's eye stalks twitched in irritation. "Focus. What about their ground-based defenses?" "Well," the Ground Forces commander began, pulling up a detailed scan of Earth's surface, "they seem to have replaced most of their military installations with these structures called malls and coffee shops, though we're detecting some unusual energy signatures from these locations." "Probably just their primitive power generation systems," the Grand War Chief dismissed with a wave of his primary appendage. "The real mystery is why they need so many places to purchase caffeine." A junior officer fresh from the research division tentatively raised an appendage. "Sir, there's something odd about their power consumption patterns. They're using enough energy to run a small star, but we can't figure out where it's going." "Clearly they're just inefficient," the Grand War Chief declared, with the confidence of someone who had never actually met a human. "Probably using it all on their entertainment systems and coffee machines." The invasion plan took shape with all the precision of a drunk architect drawing with their non-dominant appendage. Fleet positions were assigned, landing zones were selected, primarily based on proximity to these mysterious coffee shops, and contingency plans were developed for every scenario except the correct one. "Remember," the Grand War Chief concluded, "our primary advantage is surprise. The humans have clearly grown complacent in their bunkerless existence. They'll never expect a superior force to simply appear in their skies." At that exact moment, in a completely unrelated coincidence, every coffee machine in the planning room began brewing simultaneously. The resulting beverages were, according to all measuring devices, the perfect temperature and strength. No one thought to question how the machines knew their exact preferences. The meeting concluded with the kind of optimism that only comes from complete ignorance of reality. As the officers filed out, already practicing their victory speeches, a small notification appeared on one of the abandoned displays. "Warning: unusual quantum fluctuations detected around Earth's coffee shop networks. Nature: unknown. Recommendation: maybe don't invade the species that turned caffeine into a defense grid." The notification went unnoticed, lost in the sea of tactical readouts and invasion timetables. Besides, who ever heard of a coffee shop being anything other than a coffee shop? The Xylaxian stealth reconnaissance team was having what their training manuals would diplomatically call a significant tactical reassessment of previously held assumptions. In less diplomatic terms, they were freaking out. "This can't be right," muttered the lead scout, triple-checking readings that refused to make sense no matter how many times they were analyzed. Their stealth ship hovered above what humans called a strip mall, its advanced sensors throwing the equivalent of a mechanical tantrum. The data analyst, whose specialized training had not prepared them for this level of absurdity, stared at their instruments with all three sets of eyes. According to these readings, this simple coffee shop is using enough energy to power a small moon, but all they're doing is making beverages. Below them, humans went about their daily routines, seemingly oblivious to the invisible alien ship having an existential crisis above their heads. They lined up for their morning coffee, tapped away at their primitive communication devices, and generally failed to behave like a species that should be concerned about imminent invasion. "Maybe our sensors are malfunctioning," suggested the technical officer, desperately recalibrating equipment that had already been recalibrated 17 times in the last hour. There's no way their entire defense network could be disguised as a coffee shop chain. The lead scout's epidermis had taken on the mottled pattern that indicated severe cognitive dissonance. Check the other locations. The results came back with the kind of consistency that turns certainty into confusion. Every coffee shop, every mall, every seemingly innocent civilian structure showed the same impossible energy signatures. Even more disturbing, these readings seemed to be aware they were being observed. "Sir," called out the communications officer, their voice carrying the slight tremor of someone who's just realized they might be in over their head, "I'm detecting some unusual patterns in their wireless networks. They seem to be, well, they seem to be laughing at us." "Networks don't laugh," the lead scout snapped, though with notably less confidence than when their mission had started. "Tell that to their networks," the communications officer muttered, watching as their most sophisticated decryption algorithms were casually turned into what appeared to be digital origami by Earth's supposedly primitive systems. The team's behavioral analyst, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Has anyone else noticed that every time we scan a new location, a new coffee shop opens somewhere else? It's like they're spreading." A heavy silence fell over the stealth ship's bridge, broken only by the cheerful ping of their ship's newly installed coffee maker, a sound that now seemed far more ominous than it had any right to be. "We should move to the next target," the lead scout decided, trying to maintain some semblance of military protocol. The human military base disguised as a shopping center. The stealth ship glided silently across the city, its sensors probing the massive structure below. The readings they got back made even less sense than before. "Sir," the data analyst reported, their voice barely a whisper, "according to this, the entire mall is, well, it's not entirely here. Parts of it seem to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, and the food court is doing something that violates at least 3 laws of physics." The lead scout stared at the mundane-looking building below, where humans casually strolled in and out carrying shopping bags and smoothies, blissfully unaware that their local mall apparently doubled as a quantum mechanics experiment. "New theory," the behavioral analyst offered, their scientific detachment crumbling rapidly. "What if the humans didn't stop building bunkers? What if they just got really, really good at hiding them?" At that moment, every electronic device on their ship simultaneously received the same message. "Thanks for dropping by. Your mobile order is ready for pickup." None of them had placed an order. The lead scout made what was probably the wisest decision of their career. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal, and someone please explain to me why our ship's navigation system is now offering us loyalty points for frequent visits." The emergency meeting of the Xylaxian War Council bore a striking resemblance to a panic attack achieving sentience. The Grand War Chief's epidermis had cycled through so many colors that several officers were taking notes for future camouflage techniques. "Let me understand this correctly," the Grand War Chief said, his voice achieving new heights of stressed disbelief. You're telling me that the humans haven't abandoned their defensive capabilities at all? The lead scout, still twitching from caffeine exposure, projected their findings onto the central display. Sir, they've transformed their entire planetary infrastructure into one interconnected defense system. Those coffee shops? They're quantum computational nodes. The shopping malls? Dimensional pocket strongholds. That pizza delivery chain? A planet-wide antimatter containment grid. But... The Grand War Chief sputtered, all four eyes blinking asynchronously. They're just sitting there drinking coffee and watching cat videos. That's the genius of it, sir, the technology assessment officer interjected, their professional demeanor cracking slightly. They've weaponized convenience. Every time someone orders a cappuccino, they're unknowingly contributing to a planetary defense network that makes our most advanced systems look like children's toys. The display showed a cascade of data that painted a picture of technological advancement so profound it bordered on the mystical. Earth's supposed regression had actually been an evolutionary leap that the Xylaxians, with all their military focus, had completely missed. Those energy readings we couldn't explain, the data analyst continued, pulling up another set of charts. They're not waste from inefficient systems. The humans have figured out how to harness the quantum potential of everyday activities. Every swipe on their smartphones, every video stream, every coffee order, it's all feeding into a defense grid that spans multiple dimensions. But the bunkers, the Grand War Chief weakly protested. They don't need bunkers anymore, the lead scout explained, their voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much. They've turned their entire civilization into one giant interconnected defensive structure. Why hide underground when you can hide in plain sight? Those holiday photos they're constantly taking, quantum entanglement scanners, their social media networks, a distributed AI defense system that makes our best computers look like abacuses. The room fell into a stunned silence as the implications sank in. It was broken by the cheerful ding of the war room's coffee machine, which had somehow upgraded itself when no one was looking. There's more, the communications officer added, their voice barely above a whisper. Remember those assessment teams we lost? They weren't captured. They defected. Right now, they're probably sitting on one of those beaches, sipping something called a piña colada, while their vacation photos help power Earth's quantum defense grid. The Grand War Chief slumped in his command chair, his epidermis settling into a defeated shade of grey. So, when they replaced their bunkers with coffee shops, they weren't regressing, the technology officer finished. They were ascending. Why build bunkers when you can turn your entire society into a defense system so advanced it looks like civilian infrastructure? The humans haven't been watching us. They've been letting us watch them, waiting to see if we'd figure it out. As if to punctuate this revelation, every digital display in the room simultaneously showed the same message. Thanks for your interest in Earth's defense systems. Would you like to sign up for our rewards program? First-time visitors get a free cosmic latte? The Grand War Chief stared at the message, then at his own coffee cup, then back at the message. How long? He asked, his voice eerily calm. Have we been drinking their quantum-enhanced coffee? The resulting silence was answer enough. The Xylaxian invasion fleet hung in Earth's orbit like a collection of geometric shapes having an identity crisis. Aboard the flagship, the Grand War Chief was discovering that having an existential breakdown in front of your entire command staff was surprisingly liberating. Sir, the fleet commander announced, their voice carrying the kind of tension usually reserved for telling someone their ship was actually painted hot pink. The humans are hailing us. They're using our own quantum communication channels. That's impossible, the Grand War Chief declared automatically, then remembered the last few days and added, though I suppose impossibility isn't what it used to be. The communication screen flickered to life, revealing what appeared to be a human sitting in what could only be described as the world's most comfortable command center. They were drinking coffee. "Hey there," the human greeted cheerfully, as if addressing wayward tourists rather than an invasion fleet. "We noticed you've been checking out our defense systems. Find anything interesting?" The Grand War Chief's epidermis cycled through 17 shades of embarrassment before settling on a mortified mauve. "Your defense systems? You mean your coffee shops?" "Oh, those are just the public interface," the human replied, taking another sip. "Would you like to see what they're actually connected to?" Before anyone could respond, every system on every ship in the invasion fleet simultaneously received a data packet. What they saw caused several officers to faint, and at least one navigator to request immediate career counseling. Earth's true defense network unfolded before their eyes like a flower of technological terror. Those harmless coffee shops were nodes in a planet-wide quantum computing grid. The shopping malls contained pocket dimensions with enough firepower to make a supernova look like a firecracker. And the fast food drive-thrus? Let's just say no one would ever look at a burger flip the same way again. "By the way," the human continued conversationally, "those loyalty cards your reconnaissance team signed up for, they weren't just for free coffee. You're now part of our beta testing program. Hope you don't mind, but we've been using your ships to help optimize our defense grid calculations. Your quantum processors are pretty decent, though a bit last century." The Grand War Chief watched in horror as his mighty invasion fleet systems were casually reprogrammed to run what appeared to be a planetary defense optimization program. But how? Well, we figured, why build bunkers when you can turn your entire civilization into one big defense system? Every time someone posts a cat video, they're actually helping calibrate our targeting systems. Every coffee order helps power our quantum shields. Those kids playing video games? They're unknowingly training our combat AIs. The human paused to refill their coffee cup from what looked suspiciously like a matter replicator disguised as a simple coffee maker. "Oh, and those retirement packages we offered your assessment teams. Still open if anyone's interested. Great benefits, unlimited coffee, and you get to help test our new quantum-enhanced beach umbrella defense system." Across the invasion fleet, officers were receiving personalized job offers on their supposedly secure terminals. Several were already filling out applications. "This is a joke," the Grand War Chief protested weakly. "Your species spends most of its time arguing about social media posts and binge-watching entertainment." "Exactly," the human grinned. "Best camouflage ever. Nobody expects the species obsessed with cat videos to have weaponized convenience itself. By the way, your fleet's coffee makers have just finished upgrading themselves. You might want to try the new quantum mocha. It's to die for." The Grand War Chief looked at his command staff, most of whom were already examining their retirement options, then at his own coffee cup, which now sported a cheerful, powered by Earth Defense Grid logo. "Would anyone," he asked with the last shred of his dignity, "like to join me for coffee? I hear Earth's beaches are nice this time of year." One standard galactic year later, the former Grand War Chief of the Xylaxian Empire, now answering to the much simpler title of Bob from marketing, was enjoying his retirement on a beach in Hawaii. His epidermis had developed a rather fetching tan, and he'd gotten quite good at wearing flowery shirts without tangling his appendages in the buttons. "You know," he mused to his companion, a former strategic officer who now specialized in testing Earth's quantum-enhanced beach cocktails, "I still can't believe we thought they'd gone soft just because they stopped building bunkers." Around them, the beach bustled with an eclectic mix of humans and former invasion force members. A group of ex-Xylaxian Marines was learning to surf, their natural color-changing abilities making them surprisingly good at blending in with the waves. Near the beach bar, a former security chief was winning a limbo contest thanks to their conveniently flexible spine. "Did you see the latest update to the defense grid?" his companion asked, adjusting their sunglasses, custom-made for multiple eye pairs. "They've integrated it into something called social media influencers. Apparently every selfie now contributes to the planetary shield calculations." The former war chief's datapad pinged with a notification from Earth Defense Network's employee newsletter. Says here they're expanding the coffee shop quantum network, something about introducing interdimensional lattes. A shadow passed overhead, one of Earth's new hybrid defense platforms, disguised as a popular tourist blimp. It projected advertisements for beach accessories while simultaneously maintaining a quantum shield that could repel a supernova. "Remember when we thought military strength meant having the biggest bunkers?" He chuckled, accepting a fresh quantum mocha from a passing server drone that doubled as a tactical analysis unit. These humans turned their entire society into one giant defense system and somehow made it fun. "Speaking of fun," his companion interjected, "the humans are launching their new Defense Through Dance initiative next week. Apparently every dance floor will double as a quantum computing node. They're calling it Project Disco Defense." The former war chief checked his employee calendar, which now synced perfectly with Earth's defense grid through something called cloud computing. He was pretty sure it had nothing to do with actual clouds, but with humans you could never be entirely certain. "Oh, and did you hear?" his companion continued. "They're expanding the retirement program. Apparently 3 more invasion fleets showed up last month, took one look at the defense readouts, and immediately applied for permanent residency. The humans had to open a new beach resort just to handle the applications." In orbit above them, Earth's coffee shop-powered defense grid hummed quietly, disguised as satellite TV broadcasts and food delivery tracking systems. The planet's surface glittered with shopping malls that contained pocket universes, fast food joints that could redirect asteroids, and coffee shops that casually broke several laws of physics before breakfast. The former war chief's datapad pinged again, another all-staff memo. "Reminder: Tuesday's planetary defense drill will be combined with the annual beach volleyball tournament. Quantum calculations will be performed between sets. Refreshments provided. Don't forget your sunscreen." He looked at the memo, then at the beach full of retired invasion forces living their best lives, then at his coffee cup, which now featured real-time defense grid status updates in the form of latte art. "You know what the funniest part is?" he mused, his epidermis taking on the relaxed hue of someone who'd made peace with being completely outmaneuvered. "We thought they'd given up on defense when they stopped building bunkers. Turns out they'd just figured out something we never did." "What's that?" his companion asked, though they probably knew the answer. "The best defense isn't a bigger bunker," he replied, watching as a group of humans and aliens participated in what was either a beach yoga session or a new form of quantum entanglement calibration. With humans, it was probably both. "It's making your entire civilization so effortlessly powerful that you can spend your time inventing new coffee flavors and posting cat videos." He raised his quantum mocha in a toast. "To the humans, the species that weaponized convenience and made planetary defense look like a beach party." Somewhere in the coffee shop behind them, reality hiccuped slightly as another defensive calculation completed. Nobody noticed, too busy arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza to pay attention to the casual violation of physics happening beside the pastry display. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all.
They cower. His supreme order of Rex is segmented. Insectoid arms gesturing with contempt. His multifaceted eyes glimmered under the chamber's artificial light. Their species knows only fear. Humans, as they call themselves, lack the resolve for conflict. Our fleets could reduce them to ash within a cycle. A murmur of agreement spread among the council. But not all were convinced. Counselor Irexer, a hulking figure with translucent skin through which veins pulsed rhythmically, raised a massive hand. And yet they persist. Their allies have fallen silent, their colonies crushed. Still, the humans do not capitulate. His voice was a deep rumble, resonating with caution. There is something unnatural in their endurance. Vrex's mandibles clattered in irritation. Superstition. They are scavengers, incapable of real resistance. We end this charade by decapitating their leadership. The room grew quiet as a shadow passed over the hollow display. An unfamiliar name, spoken in hushed tones by nervous delegates, rippled through the assembly. The boogeyman. What are the rumors? A sharp voice cut through the silence. The assassin? Vrex leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. A myth concocted to instill fear. Even their legends lack substance. But outside the chamber, in the depths of space, reality unfolded to challenge their hubris. Ronald Alexanderson adjusted his gloves, the supple leather creaking faintly as he secured them over calloused hands. In the dim confines of the Phantom, a stealth vessel bristling with classified Earth technology, he stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the mission briefing scrolling across a holographic panel. The light from the screen cast sharp shadows across his angular features, features that seemed hewn from granite, each scar and line a testament to survival in a galaxy that had tried to erase him countless times. Your primary target, came the calm, almost soothing voice of Alpha, the ship's onboard AI. Commander Soren of Groneth. Eliminating him will disrupt critical supply chains to the Empire's outer fleets. Proceed with caution. Soren's fortress is heavily guarded, and he has a reputation for detecting intruders before they act. Ronald's lips curled into a faint smile, devoid of warmth. Reputation means nothing when you're dead. The AI hesitated, a rare pause in its typically fluid responses. Ronald, the Council is amplifying its efforts. They've labeled you an intergalactic terrorist. You are being hunted. Nothing new, Ronald replied, pulling a sleek, matte-black weapon from the wall mount. The weapon hummed softly as it synchronized with his biometrics. Let them hunt. They'll find nothing but shadows. Alpha's tone grew softer, almost concerned. You've pushed your body to its limits. Missions like this, one mistake, and it's over. Ronald glanced at a small photo tucked into the corner of the console. A woman and a child both smiling, their faces untouched by the weight of war. His expression darkened. It's already over, Alpha. They just don't know it yet. The ship shuddered faintly as it slipped into the orbit of Groneth, its cloaking systems rendering it a ghost in the void. Ronald moved with practiced efficiency, securing his gear and checking the seals on his advanced infiltration suit. It melded seamlessly with his environment, an adaptive camouflage that made him little more than a flicker of distortion in the air. As he approached the airlock, Alpha's voice followed him. Insertion point secured. Groneth's atmospheric scans won't detect your presence, but their patrols are erratic. Stay alert. Ronald stepped into the airlock, feeling the familiar pull of tension settle over him like a second skin. The hum of the ship faded as the hatch hissed open, revealing the swirling haze of Groneth's polluted skies. Far below, the industrial planet sprawled like a tumor, its surface dotted with towering smokestacks and sprawling complexes that belched fire and ash into the air. He descended silently, the suit's thrusters guiding him through the thick smog. The target loomed ahead, a fortress of jagged metal and stone perched atop a sheer cliff, its spires glowing with the eerie light of alien energy sources. Ronald landed without a sound, his boots absorbing the impact as he crouched low against the rocky terrain. Groundside, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the faint crackle of the comm link. Proceed to objective, Alpha replied. And Ronald, remember, no unnecessary risks. He smirked, the expression hidden beneath his visor. When have I ever taken unnecessary risks? The silence that followed spoke volumes. Ronald slipped through the perimeter, his movements a study in precision. Guards patrolled in disciplined formations, their reptilian eyes scanning for any disturbance. But they saw nothing, heard nothing. The boogeyman was not a man, they whispered. He was a myth, a phantom born from humanity's desperation. And yet, when the first guard fell, his throat slit cleanly by an impossibly sharp blade. The myth became a nightmare. Ronald moved like a wraith, each step measured, each action deliberate. He bypassed security grids with ease, his knowledge of alien technology uncanny. A lifetime of war had turned him into something more than human, something cold and efficient. The guards fell in silence, their bodies hidden in the shadows. Fortress entry ahead, Alpha reported. You're on schedule. Ronald approached the main structure, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The fortress doors loomed above him, their intricate carvings depicting scenes of alien triumph. He placed a small device against the control panel, watching as it pulsed with blue light, before the doors slid open without a sound. Inside, the air was cooler, the oppressive heat of the planet's surface replaced by a sterile chill. The halls were lined with alien banners and trophies of war, grim reminders of the Empire's conquests. Ronald's eyes flicked over them without pause. He wasn't here to admire their victories. Soren's chamber is 3 levels up, Alpha guided. Minimal resistance expected until you reach the central hall. Ronald nodded once, his focus absolute. Every step brought him closer to his target, closer to the moment when myth and reality would converge. The Galactic Empire thought humanity weak, thought him a ghost story meant to scare children. But ghosts had a way of leaving bodies in their wake. As Ronald climbed the final staircase, the weight of the mission settled fully upon him. The door to Soren's chamber loomed ahead, its surface etched with alien glyphs that glowed faintly. He paused, hand hovering over the activation panel, and exhaled slowly. "Ready, Alpha?" he murmured. The AI's response was soft, almost human. "Always." Ronald pressed the panel, and the door slid open. The room beyond was dark, the only light emanating from a massive tank of bioluminescent liquid at its center. Inside floated Commander Soren, his amphibious form twisting lazily in the fluid. His eyes snapped open, fixing on Ronald with a predatory glare. "So," Soren hissed, his voice amplified through unseen speakers, "the boogeyman comes for me. Let us see if the legends are true." Ronald stepped forward, his blade gleaming in the dim light. "Legends are born from truth, Soren. And the truth is, you're already dead." The air on Groneth was heavier than Ronald Alexanderson had anticipated, thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and sulfur. It clung to his skin, even through the filters in his suit, a constant reminder that this planet was a monument to the Galactic Empire's disregard for anything but its own progress. The landscape around him was a wasteland of jagged, blackened stone and molten rivers that glowed faintly under the dull, blood-red sky. He crouched behind a protruding rock, his eyes fixed on the massive fortress ahead. Commander Soren's stronghold was carved into the mountain itself, its towering spires stabbing into the clouds like jagged teeth. Energy shields shimmered faintly over the structure, distorting the air around them. Ronald's gaze shifted to the patrols circling the perimeter. Alien guards moved with rigid discipline, their reptilian forms clad in reflective armor designed to ward off projectile attacks. He noted their patterns, timing each rotation with clinical precision. Heat signatures confirmed 30 hostiles on the ground level. Alpha's voice murmured in his ear. 8 more concentrated near the upper chambers. Minimal automated defenses inside, but motion detectors are scattered throughout. Ronald adjusted his visor, the advanced HUD overlay lighting up with tactical information. And Soren, stationary, central chamber. He hasn't moved since we arrived. Ronald smirked faintly. Comfortable in his tank, I bet. Let's change that. The first guard fell with a barely audible gurgle, Ronald's blade sliding effortlessly through the gap in its armor. He caught the body before it hit the ground, dragging it into the shadows. Every movement was deliberate, every action silent. His suit adapted to the shifting light, rendering him nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. By the time the second guard turned the corner, Ronald was already behind him, dispatching him with the same ruthless efficiency. Inside the fortress, the air was colder, the oppressive heat of the planet replaced by a sterile chill. The walls were lined with alien sigils, their meanings lost on Ronald, but their purpose clear: intimidation. His footsteps made no sound as he moved deeper into the stronghold, bypassing the occasional surveillance drone with practiced ease. Each step brought him closer to his target, but the tension in his chest remained coiled, a constant reminder of the thin line he walked. Motion detector ahead, Alpha warned. 2 guards stationed beyond it. Ronald paused, his gaze narrowing as he considered his options. The motion detectors were standard Empire tech, sensitive to the smallest fluctuations in air pressure. Disabling it without alerting the guards would take time he didn't have. He reached for his utility belt, pulling out a small EMP charge. Pressing it against the wall, he triggered it with a soft click. The charge pulsed faintly, sending out a localized disruption that temporarily disabled the detector. He moved quickly, his blade slicing through the first guard's exposed neck in a single, fluid motion. The second guard barely had time to react before Ronald's fist connected with his jaw, sending him crumpling to the ground. He finished the job silently, dragging both bodies into a dark corner before continuing down the corridor. Central chamber is straight ahead, Alpha said. No signs of reinforcements, but Soren will be heavily guarded inside. Proceed with caution. Ronald didn't respond, his focus narrowing as he approached the massive double doors that led to the heart of the fortress. The doors were ornate, carved with scenes of alien triumph and conquest. He placed a hand on the control panel, feeling the faint vibration as the mechanism engaged. The doors slid open with a low rumble, revealing the chamber beyond. Soren's tank dominated the room, its bioluminescent glow casting eerie shadows across the walls. The commander's amphibious form floated within, his bulbous eyes closed in what appeared to be a meditative state. Around the tank, a squad of elite guards stood at attention, their weapons trained on the entrance. Ronald's fingers tightened around the hilt of his blade. This was where stealth ended, where the mission became a test of skill and endurance. He stepped into the room, his movements fluid and unhurried, drawing the guards' attention instantly. They reacted with military precision, raising their weapons and opening fire, but Ronald was already moving. The first shot passed harmlessly over his shoulder as he dove into a roll, coming up behind the nearest guard. His blade found its mark, slicing cleanly through the alien's armor. He pivoted, using the body as a shield to absorb the next volley of plasma fire. With a sharp push, he sent the corpse crashing into another guard, knocking him off balance. Ronald's training took over, his actions a blur of calculated violence. He moved like a predator, his every motion designed to disorient and incapacitate. By the time the last guard fell, the chamber was silent save for the faint hum of Soren's tank. The commander's eyes snapped open, locking onto Ronald with a mixture of anger and fear. His voice crackled through the chamber's speakers, low and resonant. So, the humans send their monster. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Ronald approached the tank, his expression unreadable. You're not the first to think that. You won't be the last. Soren's laugh was a wet, guttural sound. Do you think killing me will change anything? The Empire will crush your people. We will. The tank shattered with a deafening crash as Ronald's blade plunged into its surface, releasing a torrent of viscous liquid. Soren's form spilled out onto the floor, his limbs flailing as he struggled to adjust to the sudden loss of his aquatic environment. Ronald didn't hesitate, driving his blade into the alien's chest with brutal efficiency. Soren's final gasp was a guttural hiss, his eyes wide with shock as his body stilled. Ronald stood over him, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He wiped his blade clean, his gaze shifting to the control console near the tank. Pulling a small data chip from his belt, he inserted it into the console, watching as Alpha began downloading the fortress's encrypted files. This intel better be worth it, Ronald muttered, his voice low. Alpha's response was immediate. The files contained troop movements and supply routes. It'll give Earth a fighting chance. Ronald glanced down at Soren's lifeless form. Then it's worth it. As the download completed, a warning alarm blared throughout the fortress. Red lights bathed the chamber, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Ronald's comm link crackled as Alpha's voice cut through the noise. Reinforcements inbound. You've got 3 minutes to exfil. Ronald didn't hesitate, his body moving instinctively as he retraced his steps through the fortress. The corridors were alive with chaos now, alien soldiers scrambling to respond to the breach. He moved with the precision of a man who had survived countless missions just like this, his blade and weapon cutting through the opposition with ruthless efficiency. By the time he reached the exit, the Phantom was already waiting, its engines humming softly as it hovered just above the surface. Ronald leapt onto the ship's ramp, the hatch closing behind him as he secured the data chip in a compartment on his suit. Mission accomplished, he said, sinking into the pilot's chair. What's next? Alpha's voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency to it. Another target, another fortress. They'll keep coming, Ronald, and so will you. Ronald's eyes hardened as he set the ship's coordinates for their next destination. Good. Let them come. The Phantom hurtled through the void, its sleek, matte black hull blending seamlessly with the surrounding darkness. Ronald Alexanderson sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls as the faint glow of distant stars streaked past. His breathing was even, his pulse a steady rhythm in his ears, but the weight of Soren's assassination lingered in the tension of his jaw. They'll be tracking the energy signature from the fortress, Alpha warned, her voice resonating through the cockpit. Soren's death won't go unnoticed. Expect retaliation. Ronald smirked faintly, his grip tightening on the controls. Let them try. The Empire hasn't caught me yet. Even as he spoke, warning signals flashed across the display. A proximity alert blared, and Alpha's voice sharpened. Incoming. 3 Imperial frigates. They've detected us. Ronald's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical readout. The frigates were closing fast, their configurations built for interception. Smaller fighter drones swarmed from their hangars, a flurry of deadly precision aimed at cornering the Phantom. They're fast, Ronald muttered, banking hard to the left. The ship's engines roared as it veered off its plotted course, skimming dangerously close to the asteroid field ahead. But I'm faster. The first barrage hit the asteroid nearest to him, sending chunks of rock spinning into the void. Ronald maneuvered through the debris with ease, his reflexes honed by years of piloting under fire. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness around him, streaks of light carving through the cold expanse of space. Alpha's voice cut through the chaos. Deploying countermeasures. Tiny drones ejected from the Phantom, dispersing in an intricate pattern. Each emitted an energy signature identical to the ship, creating a web of false targets that confused the pursuing fighters. Ronald used a momentary distraction to cut his engines, letting inertia carry him silently into the shadow of a massive asteroid. The ship's cloaking field shimmered, rendering it invisible against the rocky surface. Status? Ronald asked, his voice low and calm. They're scanning, Alpha replied. But their search grid is inefficient. They're expecting you to run. Ronald's lips curved into a grim smile. Then they don't know me very well. He powered down all non-essential systems, the ship falling into a near-dead state. Outside, the fighters swarmed, their scanners sweeping the asteroid field like a pack of hunting predators. Ronald watched them, his hand resting lightly on the weapon's control. His heartbeat remained steady, his breathing controlled, as he waited for the perfect moment. One of the fighters strayed too close. The faint distortion of its thrusters rippled across the asteroid's surface. Ronald's hand moved in a blur, activating the ship's pulse cannon with surgical precision. A single, silent shot pierced the void, striking the drone squarely in its power core. It exploded in a blinding flash, the debris scattering like shattered glass. The remaining fighters immediately turned toward the disturbance, their formation tightening. Ronald didn't wait for them to regroup. He powered up the Phantom in a single motion, the engines roaring to life as the ship shot out from its hiding place. The pursuing ship scrambled to react, their plasma fire streaking harmlessly behind him. "They're recalibrating," Alpha said. "Frigates are locking onto your position. You need to create more distance." Ronald's eyes flicked to the navigational display. The asteroid field was dense, its chaotic terrain a dangerous maze of rotating rocks and gravitational eddies. It was a gamble, but he didn't hesitate. He angled the ship sharply, diving deeper into the field. The frigates followed, their larger frames struggling to maneuver through the tight spaces. Plasma bolts ricocheted off nearby asteroids, sending fragments spiraling through the void. Ronald pushed the Phantom to its limits, weaving through the chaos with an almost preternatural sense of timing. Every turn was calculated, every movement precise. The frigates lagged behind, their pilots forced to slow their pursuit to avoid collision. "They're bottlenecked," Alpha observed, "but the fighters are adapting. They're trying to flank you." Ronald glanced at the readout, noting the fighters closing in from both sides. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, leading them toward a massive asteroid with a hollowed-out core. As the fighters closed the gap, he fired a series of mines behind him, their magnetic fields latching onto the nearest ships. The explosions lit up the asteroid's surface, sending shockwaves rippling through the void. 3 fighters disintegrated in the blast, their remains scattering like ash. The others hesitated, recalibrating their approach. Ronald used the opening to dive into the hollow asteroid, the Phantom skimming its jagged walls as it navigated the tunnel-like interior. "This tunnel exits into a debris field," Alpha informed him. "It's heavily charged with ionized particles. You won't have full control of the ship." Ronald's jaw tightened. "Better than letting them corner me." The Phantom shot out of the asteroid's other side, entering a swirling mass of broken ships and alien wreckage. The ionized particles crackled against the ship's hull, causing the controls to jitter in Ronald's hands. He compensated instinctively, his focus razor-sharp as he guided the ship through the unpredictable terrain. The fighters hesitated at the edge of the debris field, their systems struggling to adjust to the interference. Ronald didn't wait for them to adapt. He powered up the ship's main cannon, firing a concentrated burst into a nearby wreck. The explosion sent a shockwave through the field, destabilizing the fragile equilibrium of the surrounding debris. Chunks of metal and rock spiraled outward, colliding with the pursuing ships. One by one, the fighters fell, their shields overwhelmed by the chaos. The frigates, unable to maneuver through the dense field, pulled back, their pilots unwilling to risk further losses. Ronald exhaled slowly, his muscles unwinding as the Phantom emerged from the debris field. The stars stretched out before him, vast and indifferent. The proximity alarms fell silent, and the ship systems returned to normal. "Status?" he asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "Pursuers eliminated," Alpha reported. "No signs of reinforcements." "We're clear." Ronald leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of space. The tension in his chest eased slightly, but the weight of the mission remained. Soren was dead, but the Empire's reach was vast, its resources nearly infinite. There would be more battles, more enemies, and more sacrifices. "Set course for the next rendezvous," he said, his tone resolute. "Let's keep them guessing." As the Phantom slipped into hyperspace, the faint glow of Earth's distant sun flickered on the horizon, a reminder of what was at stake. Ronald Alexanderson was a hunted man, a ghost in the galaxy, but he was far from finished. The Empire might have declared war on humanity, but humanity had sent its answer, and Ronald was ready to deliver it, one target at a time. The station loomed ahead like a slumbering giant, its massive silhouette barely visible against the star-specked void. Known as the Nexus Bastion, it was one of the Galactic Empire's most fortified installations, a sprawling nexus of command and control. Ronald Alexanderson sat in the cockpit of the Phantom, his expression set in cold determination. "Intel confirms the target," Alpha said. High Consul Varyan is inside. He's the architect of the Empire's planetary sieges. Taking him out disrupts their entire chain of command. Ronald's hands tightened around the controls. What about defenses? The Bastion's shields are nearly impenetrable, Alpha replied. But I've identified a weak point, a small maintenance hatch on the lower tier. It'll give you direct access to the station's central core. Ronald nodded, already calculating his approach. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, the engines humming softly as the Phantom slipped into the station's blind spot. The proximity alarms remained silent, a testament to the ship's advanced stealth systems. As the station grew larger in the viewport, Ronald rose from the pilot's chair, strapping his combat blade and sidearm to his gear. His suit adjusted to the dim lighting, the adaptive material blending seamlessly with the shadows. Once I'm inside, I'll need a distraction, he said, his tone even. Leave that to me, Alpha responded. I'll reroute their internal sensors and trigger a few false alarms. But you'll only have a 20-minute window before they catch on. Ronald gave a curt nod, his jaw set. 20 minutes is more than enough. The maintenance hatch was smaller than anticipated, its opening barely wide enough for Ronald to squeeze through. He maneuvered carefully, his movements precise as he slipped into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The station's interior was sterile and oppressive, its walls lined with pulsating conduits that emitted a faint, sickly glow. Ronald activated his HUD, the tactical overlay mapping out the station's layout. The central core was several levels up, its location heavily guarded. He moved quickly, his steps silent as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Every sound, every flicker of light, set his nerves on edge, but he remained focused, his mind locked on the mission. Guards ahead, Alpha warned. 4 of them, heavily armed. Ronald ducked into an alcove, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the patrol. The guards were massive, their armored forms glinting under the dim light. They moved with disciplined precision, their weapons held at the ready. Ronald waited until the patrol passed before stepping out, his blade flashing in the low light. The first guard fell without a sound, the strike precise and lethal. The second turned just in time to see Ronald's shadow descending upon him, but his shout was cut short by the hilt of Ronald's blade crashing into his temple. The remaining 2 guards reacted swiftly, raising their weapons. Plasma fire erupted in the narrow corridor, the bolts scorching the walls as Ronald dove into a roll. He came up behind the nearest guard, his blade finding the gap in the alien's armor. The last guard hesitated, his momentary uncertainty giving Ronald the opening he needed. With a single, fluid motion, he disarmed the guard and sent him sprawling to the floor. Clear, Ronald muttered, wiping his blade clean. You're closing in on the core, Alpha said. But Varyan's private guard will be waiting. Ronald didn't respond, his focus narrowing as he moved deeper into the station. The corridors grew wider, the oppressive walls giving way to massive halls lined with towering statues of alien conquerors. The air was colder here, the hum of the station's power core a constant undercurrent. He reached the entrance to the core's chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. The massive doors were flanked by 2 sentries, their imposing forms a stark reminder of the Empire's might. Ronald took a deep breath, his mind sharpening as he prepared for the confrontation. The sentries fell swiftly, their massive size no match for Ronald's speed and precision. He stepped over their lifeless forms, his gaze locking onto the doors as they slid open with a hiss. The chamber beyond was vast, its centerpiece a towering structure of crystalline machinery. The power core pulsed with energy, casting eerie reflections across the room. At its base stood High Consul Varyan, his robes flowing like liquid metal. His elongated form was regal and imposing, his gaze cold and calculating as it fixed on Ronald. So, Varyan said, his voice resonating through the chamber, the humans send their most infamous assassin. I've heard much about you, Ronald Alexanderson. Ronald stepped forward, his blade gleaming under the core's light. Then you know why I'm here. Varyan's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes glinting with amusement. Arrogance is a common flaw among your kind. Do you truly believe killing me will stop the Empire? It'll slow you down, Ronald replied. Long enough for humanity to fight back. Varion's smile faded, his expression hardening. You underestimate us. The consul raised a hand, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, their barrels glowing with lethal energy. At the same time, a squad of elite guards poured into the room, their weapons trained on Ronald. Ronald moved without hesitation, his blade a blur as he deflected the first wave of plasma fire. He darted between the guards, his movements fluid and unpredictable. Each strike was precise, each action deliberate. The guards fell one by one, their superior numbers meaningless against Ronald's lethal efficiency. The turrets posed a greater challenge, their firepower relentless as they tracked his every move. Ronald activated a cluster of EMP charges, throwing them toward the nearest turret. The charges detonated with a sharp crack, the resulting pulse disabling the turrets in a shower of sparks. Varion watched the carnage with a calm, almost detached demeanor. When Ronald finally stood before him, the last of the guards dispatched, the consul tilted his head in a gesture of mock respect. You are formidable, Varion said, but you are only one man. Ronald didn't reply, his blade raised as he closed the distance between them. Varion's robe shimmered as he moved, the metallic fabric hardening into a protective exoskeleton. The consul's speed was startling, his long limbs lashing out with unnatural precision. The clash was brutal, a test of skill and endurance. Ronald's strikes were calculated, his movements honed by years of combat. But Varion was no ordinary opponent. The consul's strength was inhuman, his blows sending shockwaves through the chamber. Ronald's mind raced as he searched for an opening, his body moving on instinct. The battle was relentless, each strike met with equal force. Blood dripped from a gash on Ronald's arm, but he ignored the pain, his focus unyielding. Finally, he saw his chance. Varion overextended, his arrogance leaving him vulnerable. Ronald lunged, his blade piercing the exoskeleton and driving deep into the consul's chest. Varion's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of shock and rage. You cannot win, Varion gasped, his voice faltering. Ronald twisted the blade, his gaze unflinching. We already have. The consul's body went limp, his form collapsing as Ronald withdrew his blade. The chamber was silent now. The power cores hummed the only sound. Ronald wiped the blood from his weapon, his breathing heavy but steady. Alpha, he said, his voice low. Status. System disruption complete, Alpha replied. The Bastion's command network is offline. We've bought humanity some time. Ronald nodded, his gaze lingering on Varion's lifeless form. The mission was complete, but the war was far from over. He turned, his steps deliberate as he exited the chamber. The Phantom awaited him, its engines humming softly as he climbed aboard. As the ship slipped into hyperspace, Ronald allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The galaxy was vast, the Empire relentless, but he would continue to fight. Humanity had sent its answer, and Ronald Alexanderson would make sure it was heard.
There was screaming, smoke, and a human trying to explain it was mostly under control. Ambassador Riley Peterson stood in the center of the Galactic Council's main chamber, her 5'2" frame dwarfed by the towering alien delegates surrounding her. Behind her, what looked like a large black dog sat perfectly still, amber eyes tracking every movement in the room with predatory focus. I said I was sorry, Riley repeated, brushing ash off her diplomatic jacket. How was I supposed to know that nodding 3 times means I challenge you to mortal combat in your culture? The chamber erupted in clicks, hisses, and what sounded like mechanical grinding. Translator implants struggled to keep up with the chaos of 17 different alien languages being shouted at once. But one voice cut through the noise, like a plasma blade through steel. Cylons. War Commander Thrixnell of the Hegemony rose from his seat, all 12 feet of armored muscle and barely contained rage. His species had conquered 43 star systems through sheer brutality, and he wasn't about to let some tiny mammal from a backwater planet insult him in front of the entire galaxy. "The human has issued challenge," Thrixnord growled, his voice like grinding stone. "By the ancient laws of combat, I accept." Riley's eyes went wide. "Wait, that's not what I—" "Combat laws are sacred," interrupted Councillor Vexram from her floating platform. The elderly Zinari's tentacles writhed with what Riley had learned was either amusement or malicious glee. "Once issued and accepted, challenge cannot be withdrawn. The human must fight." "But I'm a diplomat," Riley protested. "I negotiate treaties, not whatever this is." Thrixnell's laugh was like an avalanche. "Then you will die quickly, little soft skin. Perhaps next time your species will send a real warrior instead of a child." The black dog behind Riley lifted its head slightly, and for just a moment something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Several of the more perceptive aliens suddenly found themselves checking exits. "Okay, first of all," Riley said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the translator implants recalibrate, "I'm 28 years old. Second, I didn't bring a weapon because this was supposed to be a peace conference." She glanced back at her companion, who was now sitting perfectly upright, muscles coiled like loaded springs. "Third, I never said I was fighting alone." War Commander Thrixnell followed her gaze and snorted. "You brought a pet? How? Human? Does it do tricks?" "Oh, he does tricks," Riley said quietly. "But probably not the kind you're thinking of." The dog, though calling it a dog was like calling a hurricane a gentle breeze, stood up and up and up. When it reached its full height, standing on its hind legs, it towered over Riley at nearly 7 feet tall. Its shoulders were broader than most humans, packed with muscle that spoke of a lifetime spent bringing down prey much larger than itself. "Everyone," Riley said conversationally, "meet Rex. He's a dire wolf hybrid from Earth's northern Canadian territories, bred for hunting, tracking, and protecting humans in some of the most dangerous wilderness on our planet." Rex dropped back to all fours and took a single step forward. The sound of his claws clicking against the metal floor echoed through the suddenly silent chamber like gunshots. "The amusing part," Riley continued, "is that, where we come from, Rex is considered a domestic animal. A pet, like you said. He's not even fully wild." Councillor Vexram's tentacles had stopped writhing. What do you mean, not fully wild?" "Well, his great-great-grandmother was a regular wolf. You know, the kind that hunts in packs and brings down caribou for fun. His great-great-grandfather was something we call a dire wolf, an extinct species we brought back through genetic reconstruction. They used to hunt mammoths." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "But Rex here," Riley said, reaching up to scratch behind one of his ears, "is special. He's been trained since birth to be a diplomatic companion. Gentle, obedient, protective. He's actually quite friendly once you get to know him." As if to demonstrate, Rex opened his mouth in what might have been a friendly pant, revealing teeth that belonged in a museum of prehistoric nightmares. "How big did you say it was?" whispered someone from the back of the chamber. "Rex? Oh, he's not that big. Only about 200 pounds. Pretty average for his breed, actually." War Commander Thrixnell, who had been silent during this exchange, cleared his throat. "Your companion will not be permitted in the combat arena. This is single combat, human against hegemony warrior." Riley tilted her head. "Actually, I checked the regulations on the way here. According to Galactic Combat Code, Section 47, Subsection 12, any being may bring their natural weapons and defenses into combat. I assume you'll be wearing your armor." "Of course. It is part of my natural—" Thrixnell stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You cannot be serious." "Dead serious," Riley said. "Rex is my natural defense. Where I come from, humans and wolves have been partners for over 15,000 years. It's literally in our DNA, to work together. You can't separate us any more than you can separate a Zinari from their tentacles." The chamber erupted in chaos again, but this time it was different. This time, there was an undercurrent of something that sounded suspiciously like panic. "This is unprecedented," Vexram declared, her translator struggling with the rapid-fire clicking of her species' agitated state. "Combat regulations were written for civilized species, not whatever this is." "Hey now," Riley said, her voice taking on a dangerous sweetness. "Are you calling humans uncivilized? Because that might be considered a diplomatic insult, and I'd hate to accidentally challenge someone else to combat." Rex's ears perked up at his human's tone, and he fixed his amber gaze on Councillor Vexram. His tail had stopped wagging. "Oh, no, of course not," Vexram backpedaled quickly. "I merely meant that our combat protocols assume single combatants, not pack hunters." "Pack hunters?" Riley raised an eyebrow. "Who said anything about pack hunters?" "Rex is just one animal, a very well-trained, very loyal, very protective animal, who happens to be descended from the apex predators of one of the most dangerous planets in known space." She paused, letting that sink in. "But sure, if you want to call it pack hunting, I guess that's technically accurate. After all, humans never really stopped being pack hunters, we just got better at it." The silence that followed was broken by a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It took several seconds for the assembled delegates to realize it was coming from Rex, who was now staring directly at War Commander Thrixnor with the focused intensity of a predator selecting its prey. Is it growling?" someone whispered. "Oh no," Riley said cheerfully. "That's not growling, that's purring. Rex purrs when he's happy." She looked around the chamber with innocent confusion. "Why does everyone look so nervous? I thought you wanted to fight." War Commander Thrixnell, who had conquered planets and reduced entire civilizations to ash, took an involuntary step backward. "The combat will commence in 1 standard galactic hour," he announced, his voice slightly less confident than before. "Traditional arena. Standard rules apply." "Perfect," Riley said. "Rex loves new playmates, don't you, boy?" Rex's tail wagged once, a movement that somehow managed to look more threatening than any display of aggression. His amber eyes never left Thrixnell's face. As the war commander stalked out of the chamber, followed by his retinue of advisors and warriors, Riley could hear him barking orders in his native tongue, something about additional armor and combat stimulants, and "Why didn't intelligence warn us about this?" "Ambassador Peterson," Councillor Vexram said carefully, "perhaps we could discuss alternative solutions to this situation." Riley scratched Rex behind the ears again, and the massive predator leaned into her touch like an oversized house cat. "Oh, I'm sure we could, but where's the fun in that? Besides, Rex hasn't had a good workout in weeks. The ship's exercise facility is nice, but it's not really designed for proper hunting practice." "Hunting practice?" Vexram's tentacles went very still. "Well, sure. How do you think we keep him in shape? Rex needs to practice his takedown techniques, his pack coordination, his prey tracking abilities. Standard stuff for his breed." Riley looked around the chamber with the same innocent expression she'd worn since this whole mess started. "I mean, we usually use holographic simulations back on Earth, but I guess live practice will work just as well." The assembled delegates began to murmur among themselves in increasingly agitated tones. Several were already reaching for their communication devices, presumably to contact their home governments with urgent updates about humanity's diplomatic methods. "The interesting thing about dire wolves," Riley continued conversationally, "is that they were built for hunting megafauna, really big prey, stuff that could fight back. They had to be smart, coordinated, and absolutely relentless to survive." Rex sat down again, but his posture remained alert, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. His amber eyes tracked every movement in the chamber, cataloguing potential threats and escape routes with the efficiency of a military computer. "Of course, Rex is only half direwolf," Riley added. "The other half is regular wolf, which brings its own advantages: better pack coordination, enhanced communication abilities, stronger social bonds with humans. It's really the best of both worlds." "And you brought this creature to a diplomatic conference?" Vexram asked weakly. "Creature?" Riley's voice went flat. "Rex is a member of my family. He's been with me since he was 8 weeks old. He's saved my life more times than I can count, and he's never let me down, so yeah, I brought him. Wouldn't go anywhere without him. She stood up, and Rex immediately moved to her side, his shoulder level with her hip. Together they presented a picture that was somehow both heartwarming and absolutely terrifying. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Riley said pleasantly, "I need to go prepare for combat. Rex needs his pre-hunt meal, and I want to review the arena specifications. Standard size, right? Nothing too cramped?" "Standard arena dimensions are 200 meters by 200 meters, Vexrop replied automatically. "Perfect. Plenty of room to maneuver. Rex does his best work when he has space to build up speed." Riley started toward the chamber's exit, then paused. "Oh, and Counselor, you might want to make sure your medical facilities are prepared. I'd hate for War Commander Thrixnell to bleed out while we're waiting for emergency response." As Riley and Rex left the chamber, the silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several delegates frantically updating their species files on humanity. The entry under threat assessment was going to need significant revision. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that half the delegates were already placing bets on how long the fight would last, and absolutely none of them were betting on the War Commander. The arena smelled like fear and disinfectant. Riley stood at the entrance to the combat floor, watching maintenance crews frantically installing additional safety barriers around the spectator sections. Rex sat beside her, calm as a lake before a storm, his amber eyes tracking the movements of every alien in sight. "Additional medical teams to level 7, crackled the intercom. "Repeat, additional medical teams to level 7, and somebody find the Combat Regulations Handbook. Apparently nobody's read Section 47 in 300 years. A nervous-looking technician approached, his translator implant flickering as he tried to find the right words. "Ambassador, we need to discuss safety protocols." "Safety protocols?" Riley adjusted her lightweight combat suit, standard diplomatic gear that looked more like workout clothes than armor. "For who?" "For everyone." The technician species resembled a cross between a praying mantis and an accountant, all angles and nervous energy. "The arena's containment fields are designed to prevent energy weapons from reaching the audience. They weren't designed to contain predators." Rex's ears twitched forward at the word predators, and his tail swished once. The technician took 3 steps back. "Rex isn't going to hurt the audience," Riley said patiently. "He's very well trained. He only attacks what I tell him to attack." "That's what we're afraid of," the technician muttered. Across the arena, War Commander Thrixnell made his entrance, and the crowd erupted in what Riley assumed was cheering. The Hegemony warrior had added extra armor plating since their last meeting, along with enough weapons to outfit a small army. Energy blades hummed at his sides, and his shoulder-mount projectile launcher tracked movement with mechanical precision. "Show off," Riley commented. "Rex, what do you think?" Rex studied the War Commander for a long moment, then made a sound that was somewhere between a chuff and a snort. If Riley didn't know better, she'd say he was laughing. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." The arena's central platform began to rise, lifting both combatants to the main fighting level. The crowd's noise reached a crescendo as the two opponents faced each other across 200 meters of open space. The contrast was almost comical. 12 feet of armored alien war machine versus a small human woman and what looked like an oversized dog. "Citizens of the galaxy," boomed the arena's announcer. "Witness combat between War Commander Thrixnell of the Hegemony and Ambassador Riley Peterson of Earth. Standard rules apply. Combat continues until surrender, incapacitation, or death." Riley raised a hand. "Quick question. Do I get prep time, or do we start right now?" "Combat begins immediately upon signal," the announcer replied. "Cool. Rex, ready?" The massive predator rose to his feet, muscles rippling beneath his black coat. He moved with the fluid grace of something born to hunt, every step calculated and purposeful. Around the arena, the more perceptive members of the audience began to notice that Rex wasn't just standing, he was positioning himself, angling his body to cut off potential escape routes. "Begin," urged immediately. Riley didn't move. She stood perfectly still, hands at her sides, watching the war commanders approach with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly interesting science experiment. "Riley," someone shouted from the stands. "Move!" She tilted her head slightly. "Rex, heel." The command was given in a conversational tone, the kind you'd into motion like liquid death, and useless. "Interesting," Riley called out, still standing in her original position. "Your armor's pretty tough." Amber eyes locked on target. Threat war commander's wrist joint. Alien armor was designed to withstand energy weapons and projectiles, not the crushing bite force of Earth's apex predators. Metal screamed as Rex's teeth found the weak points between plates. The crowd's cheering faltered as Thrixnell's roar of pain echoed through the arena. He brought his right blade around in a desperate arc, but Rex was already gone, circling for another attack. "The problem with fighting predators," Riley said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's audio system, "is that they don't fight fair. They don't stand there and exchange blows like civilized warriors. They hunt, they adapt, they exploit weaknesses." Thrixnell's left arm hung useless at his side, servo motors whining as damaged systems struggled to compensate. He backed toward the arena wall, trying to limit Rex's angles of attack, but the massive predator simply adjusted his approach. Rex grew up hunting things that were bigger, stronger, and meaner, strolling across the arena floor as if she was giving a lecture. Moose, elk, the occasional bear. You know what all those animals have in common? They're all stronger than a human. They're all faster than a human. They're all more dangerous than a human. Rex